This story is about a hero who was playing a game and then fell into it in a strange way. Why me? And is this world real? Or just a game? And how do I return to my world again? But I must survive first. But this will not be easy in a hell like this. The guy, crossing his arms over his chest, asked people if they knew the place where they ended up, answering that his name was Carl and he was a mercenary. The man, lost in thought, said that his name was Riley. He was a carpenter from Adola and knew nothing about where they were. Frightened, almost crying, the guy closed his eyes and answered that his name was Grisha, and he had his own stall in Halcia, and he did not know how he ended up. A girl named Jenna looked away with incomprehension, answering that she lived deep in the forest, and as it turned out, she did not know here at all. With a confident face, one of the guys answered that his name was Han, and he was a farmer, and also added that he also did not remember anything. Throughout the territory, there were voices of people who talked to each other about how this was a dream and they did not remember or know anything. The three guys looked at each other with displeasure, listening to one answer that some magician teleported them here for his experiments. But Riley continued to think and answered that it was clear that they were all residents of Tanya, so they needed to continue comparing facts to understand at least something. A girl with joy in her eyes began to fly up to all the guys, asking what they were all doing and happily saying that the master had opened a rift in space and time, so everyone should prepare for battle. Two guys looked at the little fairy flying next to them with incomprehension. The man looked closely at the heroine, asking with surprise who she was and hearing in response from her that her name was Izel, and she was the guardian fairy of this place, so it was better not to argue with her if someone did not want to get hurt. Carl approached the fairy with displeasure, asking if she was the one who brought them here. But Izel did not want to explain anything. Starting to take out the sword, the hero was unhappy that she had kidnapped them and was not explaining anything, so he decided to make her talk. Izel sighed and looked down, asking Carl to stop doing stupid things if he wanted to live. Gritting his teeth and revealing his strength, the guy held the sword with displeasure, shouting that he was too impudent for such a small fry. Izel began to smile, asking the hero if this was his courage or stupidity. Carl, running toward the fairy, decided to teach her manners. Looking ahead in surprise, the hero froze in a daze. Carl's head lay on the ground in blood, separate from his body. The system window showed that the guy was overexcited and committed suicide. Deepal looked at the hero in fear, listening to what the fairy answered, that she warned. The man opened his mouth wide in fear, hearing that Izel answered her to listen. With wild eyes, the fairy looked at all the guys, answering that they should not try to raise a hand against her, since they would end up the same way, and for her it was just self-defense. Standing on the territory, all the people ran in panic and did not believe that the hero was now dead. Izel looked away in surprise, seeing a system window in front of her, which said that the group was formed and now it was necessary to transfer the heroes to free slots. Looking up, the fairy understood with pleasure that the master decided to start. Looking around at all the people, Izel asked everyone to get ready. Being near the door, the fairy loudly shouted for the rift to open. The door began to slowly open. A portal appeared. Deepal looked at this in fear, not knowing what to do. With pleasure and a smile on her face, Izel pointed her finger at the portal, answering the people to go so that they would not repeat the fate of this mercenary. Someone stood next to the fairy, starting to call her. Han answered Izel with displeasure to ask the master to give them weapons so that they could climb to the top of the tower, since they are 1-star and they do not even have anything basic. Jenna looked at the guy with incomprehension, wondering what he was talking about and what tower he was talking about. Izel thoughtfully looked at Carl's dead body, realizing that Han was right after all. Starting to write something on the keyboard, the fairy asked the master if it was possible to give the heroes equipment. Riley looked at the guy with fear and surprise, asking him if he knew anything about this place. Han calmly answered that he had not been here for a very long time. Everyone looked at the system windows, which said that everyone was given a sword and a bow. Looking closely at Han, Jenna began to understand that she needed to prepare very well. Pointing to the house, the hero shouted for everyone to go to the arsenal and take weapons, since they would soon begin. All the people looked after Han, asking what kind of battle it would be and what beginning everyone was talking about. Panic began in the area. Everyone was shouting that they could not fight anyone. There were many weapons in the arsenal. people began to take different equipment. A few seconds later, everyone came out of the arsenal with a full set. Izel, with a smile on her face, was next to the portal and pointing her finger at it, shouting for the group to go forward. Someone's hand touched the portal. The heroes, afraid to go there, looked at it in surprise and heard the fairy shouting at them to go faster. Jenna looked in surprise as Han took a weak shield, deciding to team up with the guy. Approaching the hero, the girl looked at the guy, starting to ask him if he knew what was behind those gates and why they all needed weapons. Han sighed in displeasure and looked at the floor, saying that it was too many questions. But they were all going to the arena to kill enemies, and the rest was not up to them. The heroes began to look at the system window, which said that one woman had already left their world. A few seconds later, the system window showed that almost everyone in the group of people had died. Han looked at this, answering that he did not expect anything else from one's stars. Izel looked at the message with displeasure, which said that one group had been destroyed. Han was surprised that it happened so quickly. Starting to get angry, the fairy heard the master asking the remaining heroes to move to free slots. Han understood that it was their turn, and the girl meanwhile was thinking why no one had returned from the portal. One of the men approached Izel in fear, asking him to feel sorry for him, since arthritis had broken out. Jenna noticed how calm Han was. Taking the man by the clothes, the heroine shouted that they needed to go and unite in order to survive. As they went into the portal, the guys heard the fairy shouting to everyone that they could handle it. Their feet were standing on the new ground. Jenna and the others looked around in surprise. Starting to look around, a group of people wondered where they were. There was something written on the wall at the top of the building. The door showed that this was the first floor of the main dungeon. Han looked ahead confidently, seeing that the system window said that the gate was opening and they needed to get ready. So he began to shout to the guys not to panic. The light became brighter, transferring the guys to a new world. Grass, a calm, peaceful sky. A group of people looked around in fear, seeing that they were in a field. The heroes asked with confusion where they were. Goblins began to run at the guys. Their levels were at the top, and the system window showed that the guys needed to destroy their enemies. Looking closely at the monsters, Han shouted for all the guys to gather, because if they do not fight, they will die. Seeing how the heroes ran back in fear, the guy did not know what to say to this. Jenna screamed loudly, and looking to the side asked where the old man went. The system window showed that Jenna was experiencing fear, so all the characteristics were reduced by 30%. The man continued to run quickly, loudly screaming that 3 guys began to quickly run back. The system window showed that the heroes were experiencing fear, so all the characteristics were reduced by 30%. Jenna looked away in fear, seeing how the guys crashed into the wall. With incomprehension, the heroes saw how they were standing near the wall, and they could not get out of this place. The man, knocking on the shield, discontentedly asked to let him out. Looking back, Han mockingly called everyone pathetic cowards. Jenna looked at the guy in fear, starting to confidently look at Han. The girl asked him if they would be able to get out if they killed all these goblins. Looking forward, Han began to tell the girl that he would go into close combat, and she would shoot back. Looking at the hero, Jenna asked what would happen to the rest of the group. Looking forward confidently, Han asked the girl not to think about it, since they were of no use. The goblins began to open their mouths wide. The monsters were quickly approaching the heroes. Running confidently forward, Han began to understand that he had never held a shield and sword in his hand. The monsters jumped on the main character, trying to kill him. Looking at the goblins, the guy answered that his name was Han. Starting to fight the goblins, the guy and Jenna tried to defend themselves or get away from the monsters' attack. The main character knew that he had gotten into a game that depended only on luck. The door that opened the portal was tightly closed. The game Choose Me was loading on the phone. A huge number of people played it. The goal of this game was to reach the 100th floor of the tower. Players began to create items to improve and strengthen the heroes, and then worked out tactics to pass each stage. Until yesterday, Han was an ordinary person playing this game. Sitting on the couch, the hero held the phone in his hand and looked at the new event in the game, which was called the Paranormal Dungeon. Looking closely at the phone, Han realized that the maximum rank in this game is 7 stars, and the guy has bad luck. Han opened thousands of cards, but never got 7 stars, despite the fact that everyone already has them. Thinking, the hero realized that this game is different from its peers, and it's rather harsh rules, and all the heroes have only one life. An important warning appeared. Holding the phone tightly in his hands, the hero did not understand why his players were afraid, seeing that each of them was experiencing fear. With a calm face looking at the game, Han saw how his fighter was experiencing fear. Some boss of level 999 in the game began to kill Han's players. Looking at the phone with incomprehension, the hero began to think that this was just some kind of system error. Watching the enemy with level 999, Han realized that his players died before he saw anything. A monster quickly jumped out of the phone, shouting to the guy that he found it. Han looked up in fear, not understanding what was happening, because the game had just ended. Darkness fell. The system window told the guy to create his account. A message came out of the darkness for Han to choose a name. A few seconds later, Han had already chosen a nickname in the game. Without pressing anything, the guy saw how the game worked for him. One of the system windows welcomed the guy into the game. Suddenly, a message appeared that asked Han if he would start training, since after it, the hero would be able to receive a reward. The looked into the distance in fear. Standing with a sword in his hands, Han looked away in confusion. Listening to the system window answer that in an unremarkable town there lived a guy named Han. Tanya is an area where people live together with other slaves. Showing the city's domain, the system window responded that an unknown enemy had attacked these peaceful lands, so the hero now needed to climb to the top of the tower if he wanted to. The hand was holding the corner of the wall. Han looked into the distance with a frightened face. A system window was shown in front of the hero, telling him to destroy the goblins that had invaded the city. With wild fear, the guy could not believe it, thinking that this was not real. The guy began to watch as the goblin jumped on him and began to understand that he did not have time to figure it out. Holding the sword, the guy gritting his teeth swung the weapon. Confidently looking forward, the hero fought the monsters. With fatigue, the hero continued to grit his teeth, closing his eyes. Attacking the goblins, the guy swung his swords one after another. Screaming loudly, the hero began to quickly swing his weapon at the monsters. The guy could not come to terms with the fact that he personally killed another creature. Starting to leave tiredly, Han saw that the system window showed that the task was completed. The guy looked into the distance, surprised by the look. Seeing that he was standing in the square, the guy began to understand that he was in the game Choose Me. Opening his mouth wide, the hero shouted, asking what was happening. Beginning to see the system window at the top, which showed the hero to summon new players in the main menu. A door began to open in front of the guy, from which a bright light was burning. In one of the buildings, the silhouette of a new player appeared, whom Han had summoned. Looking into the distance with incomprehension, the hero began to understand that she had been summoned. Looking at Han, Monica began to ask the guy who he was, and whether he had summoned her. Heading towards the hero, Monica answered that she was a knight. After all this, the guys began to fight in the dungeon. Unlike Han, who had never held a sword in his hands before, the girl easily dealt with the goblins. The tired heroes began to watch the system window, which showed that the task was completed. Han looked at each other's characteristics, realizing that they had a big difference, since Monica had 3 stars more. After a while, a system window began to appear for Han, which told him to click on Synthesis. This is a way to strengthen the heroes. Gritting his teeth, the hero understood with displeasure that he was finished. Izzle began to fly around Han, who pointed to the door and shouted at him to quickly climb in while the master was waiting for him. The guy looked up in confusion. Looking at the fairy, the hero loudly asked her if her name was Izzle. The girl looked at the player in surprise, asking him how he knew her. Han, standing near the fairy, answered his name, but from the face of the heroine, looking at the player's cards, it was clear that there was no such name. The heroine looked at the card with displeasure and shouted that he didn't look like a player at all. Han calmly asked to return him home, answering that he was Han from Seoul, not from Tanya. The fairy looked at the guy with a displeased face, having learned that he was from the earth. Starting to fly up, the heroine shouted with displeasure that he was going to go crazy since it couldn't be possible. Starting to argue, Han shouted to Izel that he wouldn't go there since he would die there. Without listening to anyone, the fairy sent the guy out the door, shouting at him to get inside. Monica, standing next to the guy, answered that he entered very noisily. His hands began to absorb magic. Han, looking at his body with fear, answered that it all began. Synthesis is when one of the heroes rushes as a sacrifice to strengthen the other. One of the heroes is absorbed by the other. Looking away with displeasure, the hero understood that Monica had 4 stars, and he had 1, so no normal player would sacrifice the heroine for him. The knight stood quietly to the side, closing her eyes and lowering her head. Gritting his teeth, the hero closed his eyes in displeasure, realizing that this was the end and he would now be absorbed into the synthesis. A few seconds later, the hero looked in surprise at the system window, which said that the synthesis was complete. The night began to evaporate in a bright light, hearing Han ask her why she was disappearing. Lowering her head, the girl calmly answered that this was her destiny and that a guy had been chosen. Smiling for the last time, Monica wished the hero good luck. A few seconds later, the guy was left standing completely alone. Looking forward, the hero could not understand what was happening. Grisha opened his mouth wide, starting to scream loudly. Han, fighting with Jenna, shouted at the people not to be distracted and fight, since the monsters would catch up with them if they ran away. Fighting monsters, the guy gritting his teeth understood that he survived. Confidently killing goblins, the hero understood that synthesis is produced by digesting heroes, and it is tedious to choose the one you want to merge, and then you need to drag. Looking away, Han discontentedly understood that they were lucky that the master is so stupid, but the game is a garbage dump. Jenna, running next to the guy, shouted that she killed one, but the second is not all. A few seconds later, the goblin's mouth bit Han's shoulder. With a dissatisfied face, the hero looked away, and gritting his teeth, understood that he did not know how he ended up inside this game, but one thing was clear for sure, that Han was summoned by a 1-star hero. The shield with all its strength began to pass over the goblin. Remembering the monster, the hero understood that this monster of level 999 looked into his eyes and laughed. Killing monsters, the hero understood that it could not be a coincidence, and that monster transferred him to this place. Seeing the monster in front of him, the guy began to understand that he messed with the wrong person. Jenna ran to the wounded guy sitting in fear. Despite the girl, the guy answered that it would heal when they returned. Sitting on the field and holding the wound with his hand, the hero knew that players almost do not directly control the fight, because the combat AI automatically conducts battles. And even so, the game gained 1 million downloads for one simple reason. Seeing the eye in the sky, Han understood that in this game, there is an opportunity to observe this world like a god. Laughing, the guy looked up and asked the sky if he was having fun there. Starting to slowly get up, Han realized that he himself was exactly the same player, where he controlled the creation of items, tactics, pumping heroes. Looking to the side, the guy understood that the master should see how he gets to the end. The system window showed that this floor had been completed. After a while, the rewards for this battle appeared. The card showed the most valuable player, Han. A huge number of people were drawn on the card, and next to them was the inscription that they all died in battle. Han and Jen's card was still burning, which meant that they were alive. Starting to train, the guy knew that he had come to terms with what was happening. Since whining is for losers, and he should not give up. Developing his running, the hero understood that this is the world of the game, and he ended up in it as a 1-star hero. Shouting loudly to the side, Han knew that there are only 2 types of death here. In battle or during synthesis, 1-stars have no chance and are useless. Continuing to run, the hero knew that weak characteristics and slow pumping are of no use to anyone, and such people will simply be wasted. Gritting his teeth, Han looked into the distance, thinking that he had to become stronger in order to survive and take revenge, and then return home. As he continued running, Han realized that he didn't know how things would play out, but if he didn't adapt, he was finished and would be eaten if no one accepted the rules of the game. As he pumped up his body, the guy realized that he had to strengthen not only his physical fitness, but also his spirit, since his chances of survival would be reduced if he couldn't control his emotions. As he gained experience with the stuffed animals, Han realized that he was used to it, because he grew up without anyone to take care of him. Despite his fatigue, the guy started doing push-ups. Watching the guy, Jenna asked him with confusion what he was doing. Seeing how rudely Han answered her, the girl said that she was just looking for him. A few seconds later, Jenna looked at him silently. Starting to pick up the bow, the heroine answered the guy that she had been thinking all night about what to do next. Shooting a bow, Jenna said that her father was a hunter and taught her archery. Swinging arrows, the heroine replied that she did not think that anything would change if she just sat and cried. The arrow confidently pierced the scarecrow's head. Wiping his face, Han asked the girl how good she was with a bow. His gaze looked askance at the heroine. Looking at how the heroine shot a bow, Han understood that she had received 4 points in characteristics yesterday. And despite the fact that she was weaker than him in this, she had skill, so Jenna had no problems killing goblins in her first battle. Looking at the heroine, the guy understood that she quickly recovered from the death of others, and at the same time knew how to set clear goals, so he agreed to help her. The hand was extended. Jenna, with a smile on her face, extended her hand to the guy, answering that her father said that having connections is a very important part of life. In this case, he was right. The hero looked at his hand out of the corner of his eye. Having extended his hand to the girl in exchange, the system window responded that the two heroes had received a relationship bonus. Suddenly, the hero began to look around, loudly calling Izel. Having flown in displeasure, the fairy shouted that she was busy. Looking angrily at the guy, Izel answered that she would not answer the guy's questions, and if he needed something, he had to go up to the tower. With surprise, the heroine heard Han asking her about the fact that only he could see pop-up windows. Looking away, the heroine waved off the question, answering that she did not understand what you were talking about. Han looked at the fairy and said that she was level 257. Looking askance at Izel, the guy began to understand that everything was clear from her reaction, and that only he could see the system messages addressed to the master. With interest, the hero began to ask Izel what would happen if the master quit the game. Thinking, Han began to understand that the synthesis of him and Monica was a pretty serious mistake, since he drained a 4-star player and wasted such a successful character by clicking on him. The hero knew that the account had a strong attachment to the phone, and it would not be possible to start over, and also the last time the master entered the game, only a week later. With interest, the hero approached the fairy closer, asking her if the flow of time here differs from the earthly one. But Izel said discontentedly that she would no longer answer anything. With a smile on his face, the hero looked at Izel, realizing that the flow of time here is different. Looking at the dissatisfied Izel, the hero understood that she could not do anything to him, since interference is allowed only when subordinating to the master or for self-defense. So in this way, he will be able to learn most of the rules of this world, or Han will end. The main character, standing next to Jenna, began to answer that they need to go through 100 floors of the tower. Looking at the girl, the guy waved his hands, answering that the creature called the Master gives them orders through Izel, and they must carry out these tasks. But with all this, they will be able to get out if they reach the top, so they need to train a lot to become much stronger. Approaching the guy, the heroine asked about the fact that they will be only 2, to which Han replied that the master can call other heroes, so they are unlikely to be alone. Han knew that now every decision must be made carefully. Standing in the square, the guy understood that their lives still remain in the hands of the master. After a whole day of training on such a huge territory, the guy learned another interesting ability of this world. Being in the house, Han understood that all the essentials and food are updated every day, and you can also get other things. And for this, it is enough to invent it, and it will appear by the fireplace or in the closet. But with all this, with game items, weapons, or money, this will not work. As he continued to train and gain experience, Han realized that the results of training were also different, as he was now learning mechanics that he had no idea about when he played himself. For example, among the 1-stars, there were more talented ones. Looking away, the guy realized that their trait was hard work, and despite the fact that training did not raise the characteristics or level, they helped to receive and develop new skills. Seeing battles, the master would sort the heroes by 3 criteria. The first was fortitude. since the master did not need heroes who tended to panic on the battlefield. Remembering Monica, the second criterion was skills, since high-ranking heroes were already summoned with skills, and 1 stars required hard work to reveal them. Continuing to run, Han realized that the third criterion would be physical training, which was the last point that the guy was working on. On the third day of training, the master entered the game. Looking into the distance, Han answered Jenna, who was walking towards him. To get ready, since the master was already here, the hero understood that he had received 2 skills, and for now, this was the maximum. Standing in the square, the guys saw a system window which said that the master was starting a call. Looking at this, Han understood that he was calling heroes, and there should be 5 people in the group, so 3 more would come. A few seconds later, 3 heroes appeared on the territory. Leaving for the arsenal, Jenna shouted at the guys to get ready for battle, since they would soon begin the battle. Izel, standing near the rift, began to shout for it to open. Han and Jenna confidently began to take weapons, since there was little time. Dissatisfiedly walking forward, Han watched as Jenna pulled them into the portal, and understood that there were no weapons for new players, because they were left with the dead heroes. Toby looked back at the girl with displeasure, asking her if she was also in on it. Han entered the portal, telling the guys that they would soon understand everything themselves. Leaving the disgruntled guys in place, Han shouted at the girl not to think about it, since it was no longer their business. A few seconds later, the players were sent into the portal with the help of Izel. The fairy shouted at them to start listening so that she would not hurt them. The door began to close. With a smile on her face, Izel looked at the guys one last time, telling everyone to have fun. A group of people stood in the shield, seeing the system window, which said that they were on the 2nd floor. Confidently looking at Jenna, Han, not noticing the frightened people, asked the girl if she was ready. Evil animals began to walk around the territory, which began to approach the guys. 3 new guys with tears and fear in their eyes wondered what it was. Han looked at them with displeasure. Looking at Jenna, it was clear from the system window that she was also experiencing fear, which is why her characteristics were lowered by 30%. Having hit the heroine with his shield with all his might, the guy asked her if she had eaten enough porridge. Looking at the dissatisfied and angry Jenna, Han replied that 2 goblins were on her, and he would deal with the wolves himself. The protagonist looked at the newcomers out of the corner of his eye, realizing that he would be of no use to them. The wolves quickly attacked the guy. The mouth began to open wide. Opening his mouth wide, the hero quickly ran at the wolves, screaming loudly. The sword plunged into the wolf's mouth, passing through the beast's muzzle. Looking up with displeasure, Han understood that the weapon was terrible, and 1 blow was not enough. His hand began to spin. Swinging the weapon in different directions at the wolves, Han looked into the distance, realizing that this would be enough for him. After a while, the sword killed the last wolf, cutting off its head. The looked away with anger. With quick movements, Han put his shield in the mouth of the wolf, who wanted to attack the hero. Han looked at the monster with displeasure, gritting his teeth. On the other side, a new wolf jumped on the hero, trying to attack. Filled with strength, Han quickly ran at the wolf, swinging his weapon. With the help of a sword strike, blood began to flow all over the territory. The hero looked forward with displeasure, gritting his teeth. Looking into the distance, the hero asked about what was going on with the goblins. All the monsters had weapons. Approaching the goblins, the guy asked the girl in surprise how many times she shot them. The heroes looked tiredly at the monsters, realizing that they were all already dead. The heroes stood in a stream of power, seeing a system window above, which said that the floor was protected. Han and Jenna began to leave, and the 3 heroes calmly followed them. The ground began to shake. Jenna asked in fear what was happening, to which Han replied that they had captured the 2nd floor and were now going up to the 3rd. The hero watched the 3 players, realizing that the master would always rise. Looking into the distance, Han began to think about what would happen next and whether they would immediately clear the 3rd floor. Exhaling, Han noticed the system window, which showed that the master had left the game. Izel was pulling herself up, loudly shouting that she was very tired. Turning to the portal, Han began to understand that they were passing one floor per day, and if time was 3 times faster here, then the master would return in 3 days. Putting the shield in the arsenal, the hero began to understand that his intelligence had decreased by 1, but strength had increased by 2 points. Character had increased by 4, and the pumping speed had also improved. This meant that Han had become stronger. The hero, not noticing how the 3 guys were yelling at Jenna, thought that the master was in no hurry, because they would have had problems if they constantly went straight up. Looking at the players, the guy realized that 1-star heroes were ordinary people who had never been to war and had never fought. Remembering Carl, the hero understood why they were considered expendable. Starting to think about Monica and her battles, Han realized that high-ranking heroes do not hesitate in battle, unlike 1-star ones who panic. Looking at Jenna, the hero thought that Monica probably knew something. The heroine stood next to the guy, offering him to try to explain everything to the guys. Han looked at Jenna with displeasure, asking her why waste time on this. The heroine looked at the guys, realizing that if they explained everything, the heroes could understand everything and then become their allies. The main character watched the trio, answering that they would soon die, so he would see how everything goes further. Looking at the guys, the hero understood that they were simply synthesizing, so he began to answer them not to freeze. Since they would, the guy's gaze was carefully looking at the girl. As he left, Han answered Jenna that he was not going to waste his time on her. Toby grabbed the guy's clothes tightly. With quick movements, Han turned over and punched the hero in the face. Looking down at Toby, the guy answered that they were hiding behind their backs while they fought. Looking out of the corner of his eye at Jenna, Han asked the girl if she was happy now. The next day, the guys continued training. Starting to fight with the Scarecrow, Han understood that after physical training, weapons training began. It was difficult to call it any special training, since the hero simply waved a wooden sword, and Jenna shot a bow. The trio did not show up for training. They behaved as if they had found a way out of this place. Jenna confidently began to shoot a bow. The guy swung his sword with quick movements. Gritting his teeth, the hero began to look at his leg, which had an arrow in it. Frightened, Jenna ran up to the guy, asking if she was okay. The wound began to heal slowly, and the guy answered that this place was different from the real world, so everything was restored quickly. Continuing to fight, the hero shouted for everyone to start. Han understood that pain was not a problem for him because it meant that he was still alive. Arrows began to quickly pierce the shield. The system window showed that the master was back in the game. Izzle looked at all the guys, loudly shouting for them to gather in the square. Jenna looked ahead with confidence and began to warm up, answering that her hands were itchy after training. Han was surprised that the girl was getting used to the new world so quickly. The guys began to look at the fairy with displeasure, asking to return them home. The fairy began to slowly lose her temper, quickly throwing the heroes up. Izzle shouted at them that they were annoying her. Han and Jenna stood aside, watching the fairy deal with the 3 guys. The beaten heroes stood quietly, listening to Izzle shouting at them to go inside. The system window showed that the 3rd floor had begun. New monsters were already ready for battle. Taking a stance, Han confidently told the girl that their strength and skills had improved, and now they should act like in training. A few seconds later, the guy quickly ran at the goblins, slowly killing everyone. Standing together with the girl and looking at each other, the hero replied that it was very boring. Jenna began to look at the 3 with displeasure, answering that they were just standing again. Looking up, Han saw advice, which said to send the disobedient fighters for a new passage. Jenna looked at Han, realizing that it was too early for them to relax. The heroes appeared on the 1st floor again. Looking around, Jenna realized that everything was not so bad. Looking at the monsters, the guys realized that they did not change. Jenna held a bow with a smile on her face and killed the last monsters. Looking up, Han again saw that the master wanted to go through the 1st floor. The girl and the hero went through the floors one by one, killing all the monsters and receiving rewards for this. Barely standing on her feet, Jenna looked at the guy with displeasure, hoping that they would not be sent to fight again. After a while, the heroes came out of the rift. Jenna walked ahead with Han, answering that she was tired of protecting them. Han calmly walked forward, saying that the master did not want to mess with insects. In the middle, a building confidently stood. The doors opened and the system window responded that the synthesis process had been launched. The three heroes looked at this with incomprehension, wondering what it was. Han looked at the guys, seeing that the system window asked the master to drag the heroes to sacrifice some. Watching the players, Han realized that they never took advantage of the chance. The map showed all the places of the game where the players were at different times of the day. Open gates appear in front of us. The protagonist, looking menacingly ahead, thinks that they had a chance, maybe even more than one. Imagining the game in his head, he continues to think that although most of the little things are not shown on the screen, the master still has a general understanding of what is happening in the game. He knows about the achievements of the heroes, sees who is fighting, who is just standing aside. Stretching out her hand, she said that now let them go to the synthesis room, to which Han replied that everything is fine, nothing will happen to her. The man behind him, stretching out his hand, asked what will happen if they go there, to which Han replied that he will get what he deserves. A second later, the man, opening his mouth wide, screamed that he was dragged here against his will. The protagonist, turning around, replied that no one cares about his opinion, and the fairy added that for the first time she agreed with his words. Looking at the frightened man, Han continued to say that he thought he would always hide behind others' backs. He doesn't know how to fight. But it was enough to at least try. The fairy added that everyone was already tired of messing with them, so let him climb inside. Suddenly, the gate slammed shut. A system message appeared about the start of synthesis. The man, opening his mouth in fear, screamed to be let out. How can they do this? Suddenly, the room was covered in blue fire. After a while, the girl with red hair came out of there. The synthesis was complete. Looking ahead, she asked what happened because that man just evaporated. The protagonist, looking at her, replied that they get rid of useless heroes here. Now it's his turn. Looking at the guys behind him, he asked interestingly, which of them will get to learn it? Then the fairy, stretching out her finger, shouted for them to go. The guy looked ahead in fear, turning pale. The protagonist stood in place, lowering his head. Then the guy going inside laughed and shouted that they were sending him home. That's right, he will finally return. To which Han, lowering his head, replied that he can believe in what he wants. After a while, a system message appeared that the synthesis was complete, and the player evaporated in a bright light. The protagonist also completed the synthesis. He increased his level and received the skill of cold-bloodedness. Then, passing by the guy, he said that he was lucky. The girl turned around and asked that if the master decided that he no longer needed the heroes, he would simply disappear into this room. The protagonist asked what she was surprised about. She herself had complained that she was already tired of them. Her body shook, and she asked what if she would also become unnecessary. Turning around, Han answered that there was nothing to be done about it. With each floor, the monster and hero that the master summoned would become stronger. They would either die in battle or during synthesis. The girl, lowering her head, answered that she understood, and apparently Han knew about it from the very beginning. The protagonist, looking in her direction, answered that she should listen better to what her father told her. She silently looked away, and Han continued to say that sticking with the right people was the best solution. We are transferred to the next day. The girl, lowering her head, screams that she is counting on him, to which the protagonist replies, "What's the point?" Lowering her hands, she replied that he had said that if she stuck with him, it would save her life, and so she wanted to make it clear that she would now be able to count on him. Han looked at her with displeasure, answering that she should do as they say. Then she cannot worry about her life. Someone, clenching his fist, shouted to be allowed to join. The tall guy, looking ahead with fear, said in a trembling voice that he behaved very stupidly. He added so much trouble to them and understands that he was a coward. Did nothing and left all the fighting to them. Now he wants to change. Hearing this, the protagonist asked with displeasure why he should trust him, to which his interlocutor, lowering his head, answered that he can kneel if he is forgiven. And the girl replied that it seems he realized his situation. The protagonist grabbed a stick, asked that he had ever fought monsters. At first he did not know how to do anything at all, after which he threw his comrade's wooden sword, and he replied that he fights so well. Han said that he is just trying to survive. Looking at his subordinate, he added that he should take the spear. He was not sure, but he heard that for a beginner it was the easiest weapon to master. He would work with it. He just knew the strategy of medium and long-range combat. The girl smiled, folded her hands, and said that she knew the close sword, medium spear, long bow. Now they would have all positions covered. Taking the sword in his hands, he replied that for 3 members without preparation, this would be the best combination. Frowning, he continued to say that what was he waiting for? Let him prepare for battle. The guy looking ahead in fear replied that first, shouldn't he be taught at least something? Han flew up to his comrade at great speed, shouting that as if he could, he himself had never held a spear in his hands, he was learning on the go, so let him repeat after him. After that, he delivered a huge number of attacks, adding that at least he had a sparring partner, he only had a scarecrow. The guy clenched his teeth in fear, then he closed his eyes and swung the spear. At that moment, Han kicked him, telling him not to close his eyes in the middle of the fight. The guy winced in pain. He grabbed his stomach, looking at him. The protagonist replied that he actually gave in. That's all he could do. The monster would have killed him long ago. The girl standing behind asked that this was his first time. Didn't overdo it. Han replied that he didn't care and didn't need ballast. He wouldn't waste time on someone who was incapable of anything. Approaching his sparring partner, he asked if he had a family, to which he replied that his little sister was waiting for him. Then the protagonist said that at least that was something. He had no one at all. He brought the wooden sword to the throat of his new ally. Looking at him menacingly, he told him to imagine what would happen to her if he never returned. The guy's face turned pale, and Han continued to say that if he was going to die, then it would be better if he didn't go near the monsters. They would be torn apart. Synthesis is not so painful. Let him start what he can't handle. Hearing this, the guy clenched his teeth in displeasure. Watching this, Han smiled, looking at his friend. He added that he already liked this look. We are transferred to the house. 2 system messages appear that the protagonist has chosen to create an additional building of the arsenal. The forge. 500 crystals were spent on its creation. Looking around, Han said that this is already better. Now the forge is available to them. Looking ahead, he continued to speak. The fairy hears him. Then let her come to him. Flying up, she answered discontentedly that, who is he to give her orders? To which the protagonist replied that she should come up with something new. He was already tired of such answers. The fairy, angry, began to hit him with her fists. And the protagonist calmly replied that she was the one who formed the messages with answers. They looked like messages from the game form. She could go online. Folding her arms discontentedly, the fairy replied that she could. She counts a little in her free time. Then Han said that she had access to a form with strategies. First the training center, then 10 weapons, then the forge. Hearing this, the fairy asked with displeasure how he knew this, to which the protagonist replied that, why shouldn't he know? One of the most popular posts on the forum, written by Loki, his interlocutor, asked that he even knew about it, and Han said that of course he was also a player. The fairy, smiling, continued to say that now he is a low-ranking character on the lower floors, and Mr. Loki, the master of all masters, the god of this game, he would definitely be in first place if he received at least one 7-star hero. Smiling, the protagonist asked what she liked about him, to which the girl replied that he can make the impossible possible. Then she, stretching out her arms, flew away, saying that he is magnificent. Suddenly she stopped when Han apologized to her. She asked in surprise what he was talking about. The protagonist, looking menacingly in front of him, answered that he is Loki. A list of building upgrades appears in front of us, after which the fairy flew away and screamed that this was some kind of stupid joke. Looking at her, Han said that the account number was 46,631,913. Frowning, he continued to say that to prevent hacking, the game account number is known only to the owner and managers of the server. She can check or tell him another email. The fairy entered the account number and then replied that this was serious, this can't be, after which she lowered her head and then her cheeks turned red and she shouted for him to quickly give her an autograph. She will be the coolest in the fan club. After signing, Han asked discontentedly what she was talking about, to which the girl replied that the fan club of Loki, the master of all masters, she will become a top-level member if she gets an autograph. The protagonist, looking menacingly ahead, answered that he had never heard of it. The fairy's body shook, and she, in a trembling voice, that she had really said so much to the real Loki. Signing, the protagonist said that, okay, he was now a one-star hero who cared. Suddenly, the fairy screamed for him to stop. What would happen to the settlement without him? To which Han replied that he had no idea. We are transferred to the settlement, 30 floors of a huge fortress, capacity for 20,000 people. Most of the buildings there are upgraded to level 22. Huge pumping. But so what? He is the dungeon master now. The girl, frightened, looking ahead, asked what would happen to all the residents, to which the protagonist replied that she should disband the settlement if she was worried about them. Her face turned pale and she replied that she couldn't, to which the protagonist replied that he knew she was just a mid-level moderator who handled all sorts of little things. He tilted his head and added that the master of this account was also a person from Earth, and the heroes who were summoned here were not AI at all. The fairy replied that they came from different worlds, but they were all real people. Introducing the creator, she added that he didn't know about it. He was just a player who liked to play. For him, the heroes were just consumables, who could be exposed to any danger. Hearing this, Han looked away with displeasure, asking that he would be able to return home if he climbed to the top. Yeah, I don't know. After which the protagonist, frowning, said that he would then ask another question. Who placed him here? The girl replied that she couldn't say that. While she was climbing, he folded his hands and asked what access and powers she had. The fairy said that she could give the master advice, open and close buildings, help in choosing something. Han, imagining the settlement, asked that the cities of other masters look the same. The fairy answered that there was some difference, but in general, yes. The protagonist frowned and imagined a huge number of islands, thinking that there were a million such worlds. An image of heroes appeared in his head, and he thought that the summoning, the system for creating an infinite number of heroes with thousands of different combinations of skills, turned out to be a lie. Quantum artificial intelligence was a deception. The heroes were not advanced machines, but real people. The roguelike system, endless content options. In fact, a million different worlds. Pressing a button on his phone, he thought that what was happening in the game was real. His thoughtless actions in the past doomed many people to death. After which, the protagonist called the fairy with displeasure. Looking at her, he told her to listen to him if she wanted to climb up. We are transported to the mannequins. The girl swings her blade, looking at her. Han thinks that she is just a genius. She is growing at a speed that is inaccessible to other heroes of her level. For the first time she holds a dagger, but she got the hang of it so quickly. Looking at the tall guy who barely repels attacks, the protagonist thinks that with such success as his, he will die on the battlefield, pointing a finger back. She said that she gave in, but it did not really help, to which the protagonist replied that she should not get cocky. They need to go, the girl asked. What happened? Is he really not going to train his number one assistant? Suddenly a fairy appeared who loudly shouted in displeasure, how dare she address him like that? She is number one. The fairy continued to shout contentedly, but suddenly Han grabbed her, answering that it is not time for her to work. Even in her hand she shouted that, in any case, she is the first assistant, the protagonist. Looking at her, thought that maybe he should not tell her about this. Then he went to the warehouse asking the fairy to open it. They went inside, a message that Han found iron, leather, and boards in the warehouse. They went outside. The protagonist asked the fairy to open the forge, and the girl took the cart, asked what he was planning. Han replied that he will not forever wield such a mediocre sword. Looking at the forge, he thought that from the conversation he understood that he is half a hero and half a master. Approaching the furnace, he continued to think about whether he would be able to enter areas accessible only to masters. A fairy flew up, asking what he would create, a leviathan or a brunette, to which the protagonist replied that in such a place, a system message appeared that there was no building upgrade. A penalty was imposed, there was no master blacksmith, and another penalty, and no blueprint. The chance of success was terrible. Did he want to start creating? The fairy, looking at the furnace, asked what he wanted to create an item. Han replied, something like that. A system message appeared that he needed to choose a difficulty level. The higher the level, the higher the possible reward. The protagonist replied that he needed extreme hell. Hearing this, the fairy jumped to the side, shouting that, extreme hell, there are triple penalties. To which Han calmly replied that she should just watch. Looking at the creation of the sword, he replied that this is a mini-game for masters. It is usually skipped, although the rewards are solid. A system message appeared that he has 3 minutes. The fairy shouted that she can't even understand the shape. The protagonist stretching his hand forward, grabbed a small cube, lowering his head. He said that it is not a problem for him. Then his friends faced Han, and she shouted that this is the legendary movement of 1,000 hands. Han began to grab cubes at great speed. A system message appeared in front of him that he achieved absolute success and created a cunning longsword. The fairy beamed with happiness, looking at the protagonist's work. A system message appeared in front of him that the cunning longsword is durable. Light and sharp, mediocre materials are skillfully combined. The protagonist continued to rearrange the cubes at great speed. Artifacts and system messages appeared in front of him, which said that he created a balanced short bow, a sharp long spear, and a strong iron shield. Pulling it into his hands, he said that it was only C rank. The quality of the materials was telling, to which the fairy replied that he would not do it anymore. The protagonist said that it could attract attention, and he did not need the masters to guess anything. We are transported to the forest. The girl, looking menacingly ahead, releases an arrow at great speed. One accurate hit, and her enemy falls to the floor. We are on the 4th floor. On it, it is necessary to destroy all the enemies. The girl, smiling, looks at her new weapon, saying that the tension is much stronger. Such a bow will definitely not want to steal. Han, looking menacingly ahead, answered that she should use the personal weapon function so that this does not happen. Several monsters appear in front of them, and the protagonist continues to say that the master is so strange, sent them to fight 3 of them. They need to deal with the harpies. The heroes lined up. The guy began to wave his spear to destroy the enemy. Han, gritting his teeth, blocked the monster's attack. A system message appeared in front of him that his ally was experiencing fear, and all stats were reduced by 30%, after which he said that he was too chaotic. Then, as his comrades swung the blade of the computer at the harpy, after a few seconds, the girl hit him in the face, shouting for him to pull himself together. The guy looked at the blood flowing from his nose in fear, and she shouted for him to understand what was at stake in his life. The protagonist, dashing forward at the monster, added that he should pull himself together, to which the guy, stretching out his spear, replied that he understood. All 3 of them attacked the monsters at the same time. A system message appeared in front of them that this floor was cleared. Their reward was 10,000 gold, iron ore, and leather. The guy tried to catch his breath, looking down, raising his eyes. He said that again he was just in the way. What will happen to him now? A system message appeared that he had been added to favorites. Raising his head, Han said that he would live for now. The master had added him to his favorites. Hearing this, the guy opened his mouth wide and, clenching his fists, shouted that he had done it. Bending over, she looked at the protagonist, saying that first his first subordinate had succeeded, now the second one had succeeded, to which Han replied that he had no subordinates, after which he headed to the warehouse. Looking down, he thought that his first subordinate would most likely be his old girlfriend. Several cards were in his head, and he thought that a group of 5 people, 6-star heroes of the 99th level, each with their own divine and other powerful skills, maybe he could still meet them, remembering his city. He continued to think that this isn't a FK game. The Vice Master will cope with the management quite well, especially since she is insured. They are both so smart that even he sometimes wonders if this is really AI. A tower appeared in his head, and he continued to think that now he realized that these were real people. We are transferred to the tower. The girl, looking at her friend, asks if she is really leaving. Answers something that now every minute is important. The girl in white clothes answers that she cannot help in any way, and leaves the research to her. After a few seconds of silence, looking at her leaving friend, she adds that she hopes that she will be able to find the master. A system message appeared in front of the house that his living area was upgraded to level 2, and the limit of heroes of the settlement increased. A new interior appeared inside, and a system message appeared that the dining room of the living area was completed. The heroes will be able to receive higher quality dishes. We are transferred to the training ground. The system message informs that the training area has been upgraded to the 2nd level. The effectiveness of training has been increased. Then we appear near a small building. The message says that 3 structures of the arsenal, a forge, a carpenter's workshop, and a metalworking workshop have formed a common building, an equipment workshop. The territory of the settlement began to increase to the 2nd level. The girl watched this in surprise, opening her mouth. She asked what was happening, and the guy added that this master is really a great wizard. How is this even possible? The protagonist, looking around, replied that he simply invested money. It seems he liked the game. Looking at the new structure, he thought that the lively behavior of the heroes and the realism of the battles. He thinks it's all about the feeling that the characters are real people, not pictures. But, in fact, they are real people. After which he said that the higher they climb, the better the conditions will be. Looking towards the ferry, he added that the user plays at a strictly defined time, apparently an office worker. It seems that he not only explores the game, but also donates. His girlfriend replied that they were lucky that it was not some poor student. He had enough money to buy a set for 65,000 won. Smiling, Han lowered his head, thinking that, unlike other games, this does not reward the player with crystals for winning quests at all, and other ways to earn them in the game are few and far between. After which he said that it was a great luck to meet a player who is willing to shell out real money. Then he looked up in fear. A system message appeared that the master was summoning 10 new heroes. The portal lit up. The guy turned around and asked if this was really a summoning, to which the protagonist replied that the renovation was finished. It was time to celebrate the housewarming. Han imagined the cards in his head, thinking about the fact that there are two ways to summon: summoning for in-game gold and advanced summoning for crystals. Naturally, the second method is much more effective. You have to somehow force players to shell out real money. A crowd of surprised people appeared in front of the gate. The old man looked around and asked what was going on. He was home a second ago. The protagonist listened to the disgruntled conversations in his eyes. Suddenly, he pointed his sword at the old man, and he asked in fear who they were. Han, looking menacingly ahead, told them to shut up. No one would explain anything now. First, they needed to survive. Whoever remained, they would explain. The fairy, stretching her hand out to the side, shouted for them to pay attention to her. Are there any carpenters here? If so, let them go there. Looking at the frightened crowd, she added that they needed a blacksmith or another metal worker. What about cooks? People continued to be indignant. The girl, watching this, asked what she was doing, to which the protagonist, closing his eyes, replied that she was distributing roles. They had new vacancies. The fairy, stretching her finger to the side, continued to tell something to the people, and the protagonist, looking at her, replied that if the people who had died earlier were called now, their fate would have been different. This settlement is starting to change. A pumped-up city appears in front of us. Looking at the people, a system message appeared that, creating a group, you need to drag the necessary heroes into free slots. After which Han said that they should give it their all, since they have few stars. Useless people will not get even a raw potato. Looking at them, he continued to say that the master will decide who is useful. 1 stars will go to the dungeon, will not be able to adapt and die. Most likely it will be this one. The fairy, pointing her hand towards the portal, told them to go in faster. The portal began to open. A system message appeared that someone could not return. His fighting spirit will be remembered until the end of time. The protagonist, looking menacingly ahead, said that it happened incredibly quickly, to which the girl replied that it would not be better to tell more details. Han said that it was pointless to waste time on those who could not survive even on the first floor. Looking into the portal, he continued to say that 2 had already died and 2 had survived. People, looking fearfully ahead, crowded around the guy. One of them said that he could not fight monsters, he would not cope. Suddenly, the protagonist's comrade came forward. He, looking menacingly ahead, shouted that he would go with them, to which the fairy resolutely replied that he should not interfere where he was not wanted. The girl, smiling, asked that he had always been like this, to which the protagonist replied that he should join. His skills were not far from the beginner's. Let him help. Then he looked menacingly at the guy. Closing his eyes, he added that he was glad that he wanted to help, but he should not interfere with them gaining experience. The girl, opening her mouth, raised her hands, saying that she wanted to go home and eat normally. All this time they were fed only potatoes. Looking at her, the protagonist thought that she had completely lost her fear. Raising his head, he added that the sky was incredibly bright, as if someone was watching them. Looking at the girl, he continued to say that it was just like a god who sees and hears everything. Smiling, Han added that she should not worry. He hardly cares about every word they said, imagining the screen in his head. He thought that no one heard their words. Everything that happened here was heavily filtered and sent in short messages. After a while, the guy returned with other newcomers. The protagonist, looking at him, said that no one died. How many goblins did he kill? He answered 1. Han, stepping aside, said that it was time for them to return. They would finally be able to eat something new. We are transferred to the dining room. Looking around, the protagonist says that everything looks much better. Since there is a dining room now, the food will become more varied if the master sees the benefit from them. Then probably yes, the girl jumped. Her cheeks turned red, and she shouted that this is excellent. She wants the best lamb steak. And the guy, coming closer, added that he would agree to turkey too. Han, looking at them, asked why they were even listening to him. A plate of potatoes appeared in front of them. The old man, looking around in fear, shouted that there are a lot of spices in the kitchen, but because of the ingredients, only potatoes. Han, frowning, thought about what the same man said, that he was a cook. Looking at the frightened man, he saw his characteristics. Moving away with displeasure, he continued to think that he didn't even have the skill to cook. Maybe someone else did. He looked at the girl, asked her name, added that she was now their new cook. The girl looked down in fear, and the man, hearing this, desperately shouted that he would try to cook something else. The protagonist, looking at him, replied that he quickly adapts, but it would be better if he didn't lie, if he understood that he would be easily exposed. Looking at the puzzled man, he continued to say that he would close his eyes to this, but only this time. After a while, the table was filled with a variety of food. The girl, having tried the dish, said that it was incredibly delicious. She didn't know that so many things could be made from potatoes, replied that there were many different spices in the kitchen. Han speared the potatoes with a fork and told them to eat and listen. He would not repeat himself. He closed his eyes and added that the newcomers should be told the same thing because their lives depended on it. We are being transported to the evening. The people looked ahead in surprise, asking if this was all true, to which the girl replied that she had never fought before coming here. So they should not worry, they could handle it too. The fat man, looking menacingly ahead, asked what about them, replied that they had become a cook. They had the opportunity to help them in another way. The man looked around in fear and said that he could also be a carpenter, to which the protagonist replied that if he lied again, he would be the first candidate for synthesis. He would definitely be perfect for this. Looking at everyone at the table, he continued to say that the professions in the settlement were much safer, but they should not relax. The amount of space was limited. If a character with better skills than theirs appeared, they would be removed from their position and sent into battle. The protagonist imagined the settlement in his head. They moved to the next day. The quiet life is over. Going outside, Han menacingly asks that only 3. He looked at the guys standing in front of him. The girl said that it seems that the rest were scared and looking for a place to hide, to which the protagonist replied that he was just tired of the usual sparring. You need to try something new. He began to fight with newcomers, winning without any problems, thinking that their difference in 7 to 8 points of characteristics is like between a child and an adult on Earth. Such a sharp increase in strength would be simply impossible. Looking at the girl who fired an arrow with great speed, he thought that the basics of archery had already reached the 5th level, mastery of a dagger. The second, Han looked at his comrade, who pulled out a spear forward. Thinking that mastery of a spear is also the 2nd level, but does not grow further, he trains more than anyone, but does not receive any points. Looking at his new charges, he thought that these 3 had mastered the 1st level of ball control. Their development was very similar. Maybe it was because of their age, but they were still better than those who were hiding at home. After a while, the master called 10 more heroes. This time his comrade and the others managed everything without him. The girl, smiling, looked ahead, saying that there were more and more of them. Han replied that it would continue like this, thinking about the fact that only one person died during the selection. Turning around, she asked why the master didn't take them to the 5th floor. A lot of time had passed since the last cleanup. Han, looking menacingly ahead for a few seconds, thought that because he was not a fool, the 5th floor would have a sharp jump in difficulty, after which he replied that he had not yet decided who to add to the group. Let's imagine a tower in his head. He continued to think that every 5th floor the difficulty increases sharply, something like a boss level. In such places, even he cannot be sure that he will survive. Imagine a storm over the city. He thought that despite the selection, training, and so on, many will die, and how much the difficulty will increase. His girlfriend does not know better. Cards of combat heroes appeared in front of us. They all had 1 star, then cards of support heroes. We are transferred to the 4th floor. The heroes lined up in formation looking at them. The protagonist says that now they are just shields. There's no need to rush in to attack themselves. For this, they have a spear and a bow behind their backs. Then with shouts, they rushed into battle. The guy blocked the attack of the harpy. Someone shouted that weaklings have their own path to victory. Then another knight was able to parry the attack of the monster. A shout, for this they need teamwork. The spearman began to go around the side. He made a quick lunge, hitting his opponent. Someone shouted that instead of personal dominance, they should use a combination of everyone's strength. Looking at them, Han thought that he was not going to participate in the fight. He could clear this floor alone, but then they would not gain experience in teamwork. A system message appeared that this was already the beginning, and they received a reward of 2,000 gold, iron ore, and leather. The guys shook hands with a smile on their faces. Looking at them, the protagonist thought that he did not know what they would have to do on the fifth floor. And among all the options, there was a task that he could not complete alone. The guy hugged his comrades, smiling, asking what they thought about it. The girl, looking at them, said that they tried well, to which the protagonist replied that he agreed. We are transferred to the armory. The master began to log into the game, less often. From the second pack of 10 heroes, he pulled out a blacksmith, a tanner, and a carpenter. They began to work hard in the workshop to create equipment, mainly swords and shields of rank E. They were given to beginners, which significantly increased survivability, and the main group received high-ranking equipment. Looking at the player's map, Han thought that 3 useless heroes were sent for synthesis. They never came to training, and said that they would run away at the first opportunity. Among them was a man who lied about his ability to cook. We are transferred to a few days later. The guy looks at the shield in surprise, saying that today they again need to go to the 4th floor. He wants to go further. The protagonist, looking menacingly in front of him, asked that today they will not go up to the 5th floor. The fairy answered that most likely, and the girl asked that they really are going up. He stepped forward, saying that this would not be a regular floor clearing. For now, they should not tense up, but also not relax in vain. The guy looking at him shouted that he understood. A strong flash of light appears in front of us. We are transferred to a destroyed building. Devastation is everywhere. 5 heroes are teleported to an abandoned street. The spearman, looking around, says that monsters are not visible, to which the protagonist replies that they need to line up. First, they need to get to the city center. Looking ahead, he thinks that there are no people or monsters. This is definitely not a clearing. Suddenly, the spearman screamed loudly. Shouting for Han to look there, a skeleton appeared in front of them, lying on the ground, turning around. He added that this is an absolutely empty city. The girl, passing by, said that she sees only traces of dried blood. This place is not at all like the previous one. To which the protagonist replied that there were flowers before. Looking at the tower, he continued to say that they need to climb up there. The girl quickly got up and looked around. Han asked if she saw anything. She replied that there was a city in front of her. The girl suddenly froze, and then said that she wanted to believe that she imagined it. The spearman, raising his eyes, shouted that she saw. The girl silently looked ahead for a few seconds and then asked that everything was really like this, after which she lowered her gaze, shouting that she saw a huge horde of goblins outside the city, and they were heading their way. Han menacingly asked how many of them there were. Looking at the approaching threat, she added that there were thousands of them. A system message appeared that they needed to survive and outlive the attack of the horde. The spearman, looking up in fear, asked that she was serious. The girl replied that he thought she was joking about such a thing. The protagonist told them to calm down. The spearman, clenching his fists, shouted what went wrong, to which Han replied that he shouldn't be scared. This wasn't a floor capture, but a survival mission. They needed to hold out for a while. The guy approaching Han asked if they could just hide, to which the protagonist replied that they couldn't go into buildings. They needed to get out of here. They ran as fast as they could. The spearman shouted how long they needed to hold out, to which Han replied, 10 minutes after encountering enemies. Frowning, he thought that they were unlucky. Judging by the pattern of the previous floors, the chance of such a mission appearing on the 5th floor was about 9%, after which he shouted for them to run away from the main streets and go into the alleys, and then he continued to reflect that due to the lack of opportunities, players complained that heroes were simply destroyed in low cities. The guy turned around and asked if there was no better place, because Han replied that they would break through everywhere anyway, and they did not have time to look for another place. Having taken up a circular defense, he added that they needed to stay here. He continued to say that the passages here were small. They would be able to break through in a wide line, so even if there were 10,000 of them, the guy shouted that it was fine. They would try. Then Han, looking at his team, gave them the task of guarding the passages, after which he said that they would fight in turns, let them use every minute of rest wisely. Frowning, he looked at the girl, telling her to stay in the center and save arrows. Let her kill only on his command. The guy looked menacingly in front of him. The protagonist shouted that they needed to build barricades before the goblins arrived. Let them remember, if they break through from even one side, they would all be finished. Han, looking menacingly ahead, thought that 30 minutes, he is not sure if it is game time or real time, the countdown will start at the first contact with goblins. Suddenly, the protagonist saw a small goblin in the passage, after which it turned around and stared ahead with a smile. The timer began to count down. Han, looking menacingly ahead, shouted that they did not even have time to make a barricade. He cut the goblins' bodies. Several more attacked after him. The protagonist shouted that they were approaching. He opened his mouth wide, adding that they were changing the plan. The barricades would be made of their corpses, having destroyed his enemy. More and more goblins began to appear in the passage. The girl, watching this, shouted that she was shooting on command. Han, looking menacingly ahead, thought that the tactics were simple, block and strike, after which he shouted that they were stupid, let them act according to their name. The goblins, their mouths wide open, continued to press and nest. The spearmen, turning around, shouted that they would really only last 10 minutes. Han, lowering his head, replied that he had ever lied to them. The crowd of goblins continued to crawl out of all the cracks. Looking at them, the protagonist thought that they would never die here. The sun began to rise. The goblin opened his mouth wide. At that moment, someone plunged a blade into his neck. The protagonist, looking menacingly ahead, shouted for his subordinates to change. The guy, sighing heavily, replied that he still could, to which Han discontentedly shouted for him to shut up and comply. Looking menacingly ahead, he thought that he did not have enough stamina. Looking at the tired soldier, he continued to think that it was not only the level, the technique was also weak. He was overexcited and spent too much energy. One blow was enough. Pulling his sword forward, Han thought that one blow, one monster is the most effective method. Strike, block, and strike again, after which he shouted that these monsters are as weak as the ones they killed on the first floor. Looking at the crowd, he thought that there were a lot of them. Someone shouted if they were afraid of anything at all, just running into battle, spitting on everything. Turning around, the protagonist shouted for his subordinates to change. The guy, menacingly looking ahead, shouted that he understood, and Han, watching them, thought that this was the weakest point. Looking at the girl, he told her to take another position and let her try to take the arrows they use. Turning around, she released an arrow, shouting that she was tired of waiting to kill the goblins who would break through the defense. She hit one right in the eye. The spearman, swinging his arm to strike, shouted that Han had said they needed to hold out for 10 minutes. The protagonist, looking menacingly ahead, replied that only 5 had passed. One of the goblins, opening his mouth wide, jumped forward. Something pushed him back with all his might. The girl, hitting him with her knee, shouted for them to stop climbing towards them. Suddenly, the guy opened his mouth wide and screamed in pain. A system message appeared that one of the squad members was bleeding. He would gradually lose health. Seeing this, Han, frowning in displeasure, shouted for him to be replaced, for him to forget about him and take a position, for him to stop the goblins. The guy wanted to object, but Han, turning around menacingly, shouted at him to stop wailing. He would be restored when he returned. The soldier was sitting on the floor. His body was shaking. A system message appeared that he was experiencing fear. All characteristics were reduced by 30%. The protagonist chopped the goblin with all his might, after which he kicked one of them. He shouted at the iron-wounded soldier to pull himself together, and either he wanted everyone here to die, to which he apologized. After which Han asked the girl to stop his bleeding. She, having lowered herself, began to tie bandages, and the protagonist shouted that if he did not start fighting, his friend would be killed. Suddenly, one of the goblins was able to attack Han from behind, but, turning around, he managed to react and kill him. Having pushed one of them on the head with his foot, he shouted for them to get out of here. The goblins continued to attack in a huge crowd. The guy opened his mouth, shouting that his sword was dull. His comrade, gritting his teeth, stood up, grabbed the sword, saying that he could fight. The guy, looking at his flooded sword, was confused, to which Han shouted that he should live and fix it. Cutting through the monsters, he thought that this was expected. They were better than F rank. But it was still a simple iron sword, after which he shouted that goblins can be killed with both a sword and without a blade. Hitting one of them on the head with his shield with all his might, he added that if the sword is no longer there, let them use shields. He then turned to the spearman, shouting for him to switch, to which he turned around and replied that he still could. The girl, cutting through the monsters, replied that he should rest while he could and not be stubborn. Han, frowning, shouted that there were 3 minutes left, to hold out for only 3 minutes, after which he thought about why half an hour lasted so long. Then the protagonist ordered the spearman to step forward. The girl looked ahead in fear, and he replied that she should not worry. 10 seconds was enough, after which he ordered them to switch. Looking towards the girl, he added that she should help them with arrows. Then he looked at her quiver, seeing 4 arrows. Frowning, he thought that there were very few left, and then shouted that she could not save, and anyway it was the end if they broke through. Pulling the bowstring, the girl replied that she understood everything. She shot 2 arrows at one goblin. Suddenly, one of them opened his eyes wide. He grabbed a stick, breaking through the defense. The soldier, sitting on the ground, was barely breathing. Suddenly, one of the goblins was able to break through and stab him in the stomach. Blood gushed from his mouth. The girl shot the goblin. Then she looked at the wounded soldier. He was lying on the floor, bleeding. A system message appeared that he was on the verge of death. His life was in danger. Seeing this, Han went crazy and rushed to attack. Looking at her wounded ally, Jenna was scared and did not understand what to do, and perhaps get him. But it was better not to do this. The boy fighting on the front lines, covering himself with his shield, asked Hyde if he could replace him for at least half a minute. At this time, a ferocious monster was heading towards him. He struck his weapon, which passed right next to the protagonist. Having deftly closed his hand with the body, he managed to block the enemy's weapon. After that, Han suddenly rushed into the attack, destroying the monsters in front. Approaching the soldier, the boy shouted at him to go to the left flank, and he himself was going to figure it out here, and he began to doubt and ask about Hyde, while he explained that he was resting and they needed to go. At that moment, a system notification window appeared, notifying that the wounded boy had returned to the arms of the Lord, and his fighting spirit would be remembered until the end of time. And the warrior, turning his head to the side, agreed. Destroying the monsters that surged again, the protagonist told Jenna that their allies could no longer be helped. They needed to forget about them, because without her they would not survive, and she, gritting her teeth, agreed with this. Han fought off the monsters with his shield. While fighting her enemies, the girl asked the leader how many were left, while the system notification window announced that her basic dagger skill had been raised to level 3, and she had gained the fast movement skill. Making a sign with his blade, the boy advised her to spend all her best strength on the goblins, if she could still ask about time. Immediately after that, the system notification window announced that the battle at the limits of strength had awakened the hero's soul, and his sword and shield technique skill had been raised to level 5. Pain threshold had been raised to level 2, and cold-bloodedness had been raised to level 3. While the protagonist, who was fighting off a monster with his shield, did not understand why he needed it if they were all going to die there anyway. Suddenly, the warrior was wounded and screamed loudly in pain, while the system announced that he was bleeding out and would gradually lose health. Covering himself with a trembling hand from a crowd of crazy goblins, he asked Han to save him, because he did not want to die. With tears in his eyes and a huge fear inside, the adventurer shouted the boy's name once more. Hearing it, the boy gritted his teeth in displeasure and looked away. At the same time, the goblins began to advance on the defenseless boy, who continued to beg for help. Ignoring this, the protagonist headed in the other direction and told Jenna and Nate to follow him, while the frightened girl remembered her allies, and he declared that he would grieve for them when he got out of there. As the boys ran through an alley in a dilapidated city, the system notification window announced that their friend had returned to the arms of God, and his fighting spirit would be remembered until the end of time. Stopping in place and looking straight ahead, Jenna asked if they were going to die too, and her leader asked her not to talk nonsense. Sharply looking to the side, the protagonist told the girl to climb the wall behind her. Looking in that direction, she asked if he really wanted her to run away herself, and Han explained that they would go right after her. Seeing the angry goblins approaching them, he informed her of this, and explained that they would have to kill several at once. Swinging his blade, the boy added that one freak per blow was not enough. Immediately after that, the protagonist struck his sword directly at several opponents at once. A moment later, Jenna, who had climbed the wall, shouted to him that she was already at the top and asked them to climb. Hearing this, Han immediately jumped up and grabbed onto the roof of the building, telling his subordinate to climb up, while the girl asked him to grab her hand. Looking in their direction, Nate immediately agreed, after which he firmly grabbed his ally's hand. Suddenly, the warrior let out a loud cry of pain from a goblin who had plunged his sword into his leg. Jumping down and destroying the enemy, the boy asked Jenna not to let go. Then he abruptly looked away. Swinging his blade, the protagonist stated that there was no time and that he would have to chop off the leg. A moment later, his ally felt a sharp pain and screamed loudly, while the system notification window notified that he was bleeding and would gradually lose health. Helping his girlfriend, Han asked her to lift him up. The system notification window stated that he was on the verge of death and his life was in danger. Looking down, the guys noticed enraged monsters there and said that they were climbing over the heads of others, which was very clever and quite simple. With great fear on his face, looking down, the boy screamed that he needed to kill Nate with a spear, and Jenna immediately obeyed him. While fighting off the oncoming crowd of goblins, the protagonist added that they couldn't let him get up because they had nowhere else to run. Suddenly dropping the spear from her hands, the girl announced this and asked what to do next. and Han suggested kicking them with his feet. Looking at the monster's hands that were reaching straight towards them, she asked how much time was left and stated that there were too many of them, and they wouldn't last any longer. Immediately after that, the boy loudly shouted that there were only about 30 seconds left, and his ally noted that it was as if an hour had passed, while he added that he was serious, and there wasn't much time left. While fighting off the enraged goblins with his blade, the protagonist thought that this was true, and that he just needed to hold out until the system notification window showed a timer showing the remaining time. Suddenly, some monster sharply pointed its hand forward. Grabbing the protagonist's shield, he abruptly pulled it down. Without a second's hesitation, Han prepared to strike with his sword. At the same time, one of the opponents stabbed him in the stomach with his blade. The goblin looked straight ahead with a sly and smug grin. Seeing this, the boy gritted his teeth in displeasure. Holding his sword with a trembling hand, he called the goblin a bastard. At the same time, the monster pulled its knife out of his body, causing massive damage. Experiencing great pain, the protagonist could not hold back a scream. Barely keeping himself on his feet, Han received a system notification that he was bleeding out and would gradually lose health. At this time, Jenna was also getting injured, and the system notification window notified that she was bleeding out and would gradually lose health. Surrounded by the furious goblin's gaze, the boy kneeling thought that this was the end. He lowered his head, thinking that he would die here, on the 5th floor, on such a shallow one, and it was simply pointless. Plunging into the abyss of his fears, the protagonist did not understand why he had to go through all this torment at all, and he would not have to face such a thing on Earth. The only question that remained in his head was the misunderstanding of why him. Suddenly awakening his furious gaze, the protagonist asked the question again, why? Destroying the goblin with his sword, Han called them all fucking freaks. Activating the berserker mode, he asked that they really wanted to kill him. And this was only the 5th floor. With his blackened eye with a red pupil, he looked straight at the monsters heading towards him, and, moving the blade to the side, said that there was no reason. At this time, the maddened goblin rushed to attack. Using his blade, Han managed to defeat all the enemies who attacked him, and he declared that he would not die in such a place. A moment later, severed limbs of goblins were scattered around the area. With a maddened look, looking straight ahead, he asked them to attack, while the system notification was placed that the berserker skill was awakened. While the monsters looked at their opponent in fear, Jenna thought that it was difficult to even breathe. Watching everything that was happening, she noticed that every fiber of her body was screaming in pain. A moment later, the protagonist inhaled air into his mouth. Then, with great bloodlust, he asked that if they wanted to kill him, then they should try. Swinging his blade, he destroyed a goblin and declared that he would not lose. Then Han destroyed several more of his opponents. Rushing across the battlefield, the boy killed every monster he met. At some point, his blade split into several pieces. Seeing this, the goblins rejoiced, and the protagonist thought that even if he had to fight with his bare hands, after which he abruptly pushed off the ground. Heading forward with a look full of determination, he added that he would never stop. Han, looking furious, rushed straight at the crowd of opponents. At that moment, the timer stopped at 0. Immediately after that, all the goblins in front of the boy began to change color. He watched what was happening with a dumbfounded look. A huge crowd of monsters froze right in front of him. Jenna and the protagonist watched what was happening in surprise. At this time, Nate, lying nearby on the roof, was still alive. A moment later, a system notification window appeared, which notified that the floor was cleared, and the guys increased their levels. And Han became the most valuable, and as a reward they were given 5,000 gold, iron ore, leather, and boards. Then the system transferred them to another place and congratulated them on clearing the 5th floor, notifying them that daily dungeons were now available to them and told them to collect materials, improve their settlement, and heroes. Also, along with the guys, their remaining weapons were transferred to this room. After everything that happened, the girl fell to the ground in surprise, and the boy stood silently, in place, trying to comprehend everything he heard. He did not move at all and continued to breathe heavily. Among those who passed the 5th floor with them was also the wounded Nate. Without saying anything out loud, Jenna looked at him in surprise. After which, with a smile on her face, the girl suddenly burst into tears and began to laugh. At this time, the protagonist continued to stand in place and did not understand what had just happened. Suddenly, he was distracted by Jenna, sitting on the floor, who asked if he would give her his hand, because she did not have the strength to get up. Extending his hand to help, Han heard the question that they really survived, and confirmed it. Helping his ally up, he explained that this was a waiting room, and the floor was cleared, while she was interested in what would happen now on every floor, and he explained that this was just a special case. Picking up his broken blade from the floor, the boy explained that on such missions, the survival of the entire group depends on the actions of each participant, and if their other friends were a little stronger, then everything could have turned out differently. Approaching Jenna, the protagonist, concluded that for a well-coordinated group, such missions are usually not a problem. It just fell to them at the worst possible moment, and she understood him. After which, she sadly lowered her head. Then the guys left the waiting room, and a boy ran up to them, saying that they did a great job. With a smile on his face, he declared that Chloe had already prepared food for them, and asked where the others were, assuming that they were still inside, and Han answered that they were dead. Hearing this, he asked again, and the boy repeated once again that they were all dead. After hearing this, he fell into a stupor. As they walked further, the boys heard an unknown voice that said that the master was gathering heroes, and that everyone whose names were called should come. Arriving in his room, Han was immediately taken to his bed. Burying his face right into the pillow, he thought that he didn't really care about the death of others. Because on the first line, conquering the Tower of Death quickly becomes commonplace, and remembered that he seemed to have received the Berserker skill. Immersing himself in all his thoughts, he reasoned that cold-bloodedness and Berserker are incompatible, and this is definitely some kind of bug. Imagining their use at the same time, the boy thought that cold-bloodedness helps to remain calm in any situation, and Berserker is the complete opposite, and exchanges sanity for increased combat power. So this may be due to the fact that he is half hero, half master. Continuing to lie on his bed, the protagonist noted that there is still so much to learn, but not today. Closing his eyes, he said that from today there will be even more work. While it was night outside, Han declared that for now it is necessary to at least rest a little. Immediately after the story cools down, they are transferred to the training ground. There, Jenna was training hard, using her blade. Approaching her, the boy noticed that she usually sleeps until lunch, and asked why today so early. And she explained that it is all because she wants to live. Looking at the girl skillfully wielding a knife, the protagonist thought that yesterday she received a new skill and is so talented and hardworking. Remembering Nate, he also noticed that he is not rewarded at all, even for hard work. Standing on his hands, Han thought that his current ceiling is skill level 5, and usually 3-star heroes grow at such a speed, while the system notification window notified that his level is 9 and showed his characteristics. Still in the same position, the boy was thinking that he had almost reached the maximum level of 10 and would soon need to increase to 2 stars. At that moment, he asked Jenna, who was pawing at his torso, what she was doing, and she was noting that it looked really cool, while he asked her to take her hands off. Having gotten hit on the head, the girl with a displeased look noted that his muscles weren't even tired yet. And Han, putting on a t-shirt, said the opposite, thinking that she was surprising him more and more with each passing minute, while he was thinking that he couldn't believe that she had already recovered from yesterday. Jenna, holding her head, said that Nate never came, and the boy explained that let it be so, because he needed to be alone for a while, because he was closer to those two than they were. Lost in thought, the girl noted that he usually came to train earlier than everyone else, and the protagonist standing in front of him said that the same thing applies to Tom, and they worked especially hard. Suddenly looking to the side, he said that compared to them, those guys are heroes. Looking at the other guys who were training on the site, Han added that they just pretended to be busy with something so as not to go to the synthesis, and ran to training only when the master was there. Watching them with a dissatisfied look, the boy noted that their friends had potential. But they would have been useful, but there was not enough time to reveal themselves. So it would be better if one of them died on the 5th floor. And Jenna, standing next to them, suggested just going back to training. Suddenly they were interrupted by an unknown voice that apologized for being late, seeing Nate upset. The protagonist asked him what was wrong and why he had such an expression on his face. He explained that if he had become a little stronger, then this would not have happened to those two. Looking at him with an emotionless look, Han declared that they died because they themselves were weak, no more and no less. Looking around the base camp from the side, the boy thought that a month had passed since he got to this place, and in the real world it was about 10 days. Looking at the smartphone screen, he reasoned that during this time he figured out how often Enoch logs into the game, and the difference between game time and real time is 3 times. So here he logs in the morning, afternoon, and night. Imagining the view of the game from the phone, the protagonist thought that in battle, the game time coincides with the real time. Otherwise, the survival mission would last not half an hour, but an hour and a half, and then they would definitely die. At the same time, Izel, with a wide smile on her face, declared that they should follow Han's example because he was such a good guy and cleared the 5th floor, had such incompetence in the group, declaring that he was definitely the master of all masters. Hearing this, Jenna whispered to her friend a question about what he did and why she was acting so strangely, and he explained that it was a company secret, while the enraged fairy scolded the others, calling them incompetents who still dared to laze around while she was working so hard, and said that they would not get away with it. And the boy, leaving from there, said that it would be better to leave them alone because they would still come where they needed to go. If they were immediately after this, the system notification window announced that Group 4 had been created, which included Han, Jenna, Lewis, Jeffrey, and Owen, and the protagonist listened to all this with an emotionless look, while the others were stunned. Suddenly, an unknown voice stated that the mentioned heroes needed to go through the rift of time and space right now, and a surprised Jenna asked that the two of them were with the other heroes, and they didn't even know them. Being in the rift of time and space with the other members of the group, the boy told his ally not to worry, because this time everything would be much easier. Right in front of them, a portal appeared that the dungeon that opens every day is called Daily Dungeons, and they need to collect various materials. And this time, it will be the Kendert Forest, with a duration of 11 hours. Reading this information, the protagonist thought that they became available, and the man standing next to him asked that he would fight with them. Looking at him, Han asked his name. He said that his name was Owen, and noted that they would hardly be able to help in any way. While the portal was activating, he explained that there was no need to worry, and they would not have to fight. Immediately after that, a beam of blue light appeared in the middle of the forest, finding themselves in the middle of a new location. The guys heard the system notifications, which said that Group 4 entered the lower-ranked Kendert Forest, which is a daily dungeon, and there they will collect materials and return after the time has passed, and also received advice that dungeons change depending on the day of the week, and therefore it is necessary to check in advance where to send your heroes. Carefully looking around, Jenna asked where the enemies were, and whether these were special tasks again. Coming closer to her, Han grabbed her cheek. She did not understand what he was doing, and did not see anything funny until he called her funny. Immediately after that, the boy picked up a stone from the ground and explained that this was a daily dungeon, and you need to collect materials in it. He then threw it into a nearby portal, and the man who saw it asked what it was, while he explained that it was a trash can, and it was better to think of it as a storage. When suddenly the system notification window notified that he had collected trash and gave advice that it was not needed by the settlement, so it was better not to collect it. Breaking off a branch from a tree, the protagonist explained that it was better to throw collected materials there, like these branches. Putting the collected branch in the storage, he added that it would absorb them and create new items. The system notification window notified that 100 branches needed to be collected for them to turn into a log, which required a carpenter's bench. Owen looked at him in fear, asking if that was all, and his ally asked if they really didn't even have to fight, while Han concluded that it didn't concern her and suggested that they go hunting. Following him, the girl noted that 5 did not let her rest, and asked what they would hunt: boars, deer, rabbits, and was also happy that they would finally eat meat. After some time, the guys came across a deer standing in the middle of a clearing. Seeing it, Jenna began to drool with joy, and she said that she found it, and asked the cutlet not to move from the spot. Immediately after that, the girl shot. Her arrow hit the animal right in the approaching the carcass of her prey. The archer noted that it looked appetizing, and the boy standing behind asked if she knew how to cut up, while she explained that, of course she did, because she had watched her father do it for years. Getting down to business, Jenna explained that first you need to drain all the blood, then open the belly and pull out the entrails, while the protagonist silently watched everything that was happening. As Han began to leave, he told her to throw everything into the rift when they were done and not to leave anything here, and she asked where he was going, while he noted that he needed to do something instead of asking questions, and he was also tired of eating only potatoes. Immediately after that, the boy headed to another part of the forest to a huge waterfall. Looking at the timer, he thought that there was only half an hour left, and they would automatically return to his settlements when the timer ran out. Looking ahead, the protagonist suddenly noticed the animals standing there and was glad that he found them. Taking out his blade, Han looked at the queen of the forest, noting that rare monsters can be found in the dungeon forests. Imagining a low-ranking attribute stone in his head, the boy reasoned that they were used to obtain materials for promoting heroes, and such monsters did not always appear, but if they did, they were not very difficult to find. Immediately after that, he rushed forward. Hearing something incomprehensible, the deer immediately raised its head. A moment later, the protagonist decapitated it with just one swing of the sword. Noticing this, his relative immediately rushed to attack towards Han. Seeing this, he attacked back, inflicting a huge number of cuts with his blade. Then Han found himself right in front of the queen of the forest and said that all her friends were dead, which was a pity. The majestic white deer looked at him with great displeasure. Pointing his sword straight at him, the boy asked to attack. Immediately after this, the story moves to another part of the forest. The frightened boy screamed that he saw a monster ahead, and Owen, who was with him, could not understand where it was. Through the small leaves of the bushes, the guys saw the head of a monster with brightly glowing red eyes. Noticing something strange, the man asked his friend to wait. Suddenly, he saw that it was Han walking, and he, carrying his prey, asked that they were really waiting for someone else. Coming closer to them, the boy threw the head of the queen of the forest on the ground. Noticing this, Jenna admiringly noted that it was very huge, and the protagonist declared that he had no more strength left, and asked for help. Watching his ally put the prey he brought into the storage, Han was interested in how much she managed to catch. The notification window, the system notified that she collected the blood of the queen, while the girl herself reported that 2 deer and 1 boar, so there should be enough meat for everyone. Picking up the head of the queen of the forest from the ground, the archer asked why she needed it, because it tasted disgusting. The boy, choosing his shield behind his back, explained that he needed the horn, which could not be torn out of her. Looking at the severed head, Jenna declared that it was a female, and the protagonist was surprised that she determined the gender from one head, while she explained that she had lived in the forest for a very long time. Suddenly, a notification window appeared, the system with joyful sounds notifying that the girl was receiving the forest hunter skill, while she, humming a song, cut up the deer's head, and Han was surprised by her yet another awakening. Looking at the awakening stone, he thought that she would easily increase her rank, while the notification window in the system notified that this was a low-ranking stone of the wind attribute and a skill of the attribute one of the elements, which are filled with the energy of the forest, and are used to create items to increase the rank of heroes. Immediately after this narration, the stories are transferred to the tavern in the main camp of the heroes. Looking at the table, strewn with various meats, the people there were happy about his appearance, and predicted that they really missed normal food. Jenna, with a smile on her face, approached the protagonist, saying that everyone was happy that they ate a whole deer, and he noted that if she finished, she should follow him. Remembering all the available dungeons, he thought that daily dungeons and the mechanics in which they change, depending on the day of the week. So today, the Sinmeal Plateau is available, and you can also get attribute stones there. A moment later, the guys entered the dungeon. The system notification window notified that a temporary group of 2 of them entered the low-ranking dungeon of the Sinmeal Plateau. Looking around, the girl asked if they could really become stronger in these dungeons, and her friend explained that they needed attribute stones for this, and all that was left was to find them. Then the archer slowly approached the edge of the cliff. Looking ahead, she was amazed at the beautiful view right in front of her, and the wind enveloping her. At this time, Han noticed something ahead. Flowers of life grew right on the cliff edge, which surprised him greatly. Looking closely at them, the boy thought that he had already seen them, and that this was the basis of health potions. So he would need to collect some later. After some time, loud sounds of battle spread across the plateau. The protagonist and his ally fought against a huge wolf. In the end, the guys managed to destroy their enemy, knocking him straight to the ground. With a wide smile on her face, Jenna, looking at this, said that it was not difficult to deal with one wolf. While sheathing his blade, Han noted that others could smell the blood, so he needed to speed up, while the girl agreed to it and began to cut up the monster. She then asked what to do with the fangs and claws, and the boy told her to cut it out, while he looked at the low-ranking water attribute stone. The system notification window notifying that it was an attribute skill, one of the elements of which is filled with plateau energy and is used to create items and increase the rank of heroes. Continuing with her work, the archer noted that it was so calm there, and the protagonist asked to say such things when he finished draining the blood. With a smile on her face, Jenna noted that if only it were always like this and just hunting and gathering, then there would be enough food and shelter. She also added that it would be a real paradise if not for the master, and Han, stunned by such a statement, remembered that he also used to play. At this point, the girl expressed a wish that he would never come again, and the boy suddenly thought about it. Looking at his ally, he thought that the inhabitants of Nilfheim also thought much better of him without the master, asking why she did not want to fight. Holding a low-ranking attribute stone in his hands, the organist said that it was not necessary to do this all her life, and synthesis was no longer a threat to her. Closing her eyes, the archer asked what he wanted to do for her more peacefully, and he answered that maybe so, and whether this was so depended on the situation in the settlement. At that moment, Jenna asked why he was suggesting this if he wasn't going to leave the front line himself, which greatly shocked her ally. After her question, Han closed his eyes and smiled. Then the story's narrative moves to a few days later in some forest. The guys were teleported once again, and the system notification window announced that this was the 6th floor, and the type of tasks was reconnaissance, and its goal was to explore an unfamiliar location. The system notification window also announced that Tom had joined Group 1, and he stated with great determination that they could rely on him. At this time, a frightened Nate noted that this was not a daily dungeon, and the group leader concluded that reconnaissance was also an unusual task. Looking at his ally, the spearman said that there were no enemies in sight, and would everything really be like on 5? And he stopped him, telling him not to make noise and not to stick his head out. After his words, the guys all silently lay down on the ground, and the dumbfounded boy who was watching this noted that it was not necessary to lie on the ground. Looking at the frightened Nate, the protagonist explained that everything would be different here, and he could not worry, because if they did everything right, they would be able to calmly pass the floor, and he obeyed him. After some time, the guys came across 3 level 8 goblins and assumed that they could kill them. Noticing a horn on the belt of one of them, Han said that if he had this device, then somewhere nearby there was probably help. Looking at Jenna standing on a tree branch, he asked if she would see anything, and she answered that there were goblin settlements ahead. As she went down, the girl noticed that there were quite a lot of them, about 100, and the boy who heard this concluded that it was a trap. They would definitely be surrounded if they tried to fight. Looking at his opponents, the protagonist gave orders, telling the archer that she had a goblin on the right and Nate should cut off the head of the second one when they were distracted, and he immediately accepted the order. Then Han looked at the remaining Tom. Taking his blade out of its sheath, he asked to cover them if something went wrong, and he obeyed him. A moment later, Jenna released her arrow. It hit one of the goblins right in the forehead. At the same moment, a spearman jumped out of the bushes, swinging his weapon to strike the enemy. With a deft movement of the spear, he managed to destroy his enemy. Seeing this, the last goblin wanted to use his horn when suddenly Han did not appear. Claiming that no help would come, he swung his blade and cut off the goblin's head. Immediately after that, the notification window of the system announced that the floor had been cleared, and the most valuable player was Han, who received a reward of 5,000 gold, and the guys immediately teleported back, while Tom, surprised by this, asked if that was all. At the same moment, the boy said that that was not all, and that they needed to look around, rushing forward at great speed. Continuing to run somewhere, he thought that there should be a hint about the next floor, and the reconnaissance mission could help find out information about what awaits them in the future. And although all events are mostly random, some little things can be predicted. After some time, he managed to reach the fortified goblin village. Inside, the monsters were holding back the wolves, who were on chains. Looking at the goblin village through the cracks in the fence, the boy wondered how huge this settlement was. Suddenly, one of the goblins noticed something off to the side. Looking there, he saw only disappearing particles of blue. A moment later, all the guys were transferred to the waiting room. Looking at the protagonist standing next to him, Jenna asked why he ran away so suddenly, and then he explained that he was just looking around. Suddenly lost in thought, he thought that such clues often appear in the main dungeons, and the chain of quests that begins with reconnaissance is called a flow. And only the attentiveness of the master depends on whether he understands these clues or not, so he did not know if he saw the same thing that he himself did. So it irritates him. Continuing to be in thought, the boy reasoned that it was too early for a flow, and events were developing faster than he expected, when suddenly Chloe ran up to him, saying that they had problems. Approaching Han, she explained that some strangers had come, and he, looking at her, asked what was wrong with that, because they often come. Then the girl declared that these were others, and they had weapons with them, and they themselves were some kind of strange, and the boy, angry from hearing what he heard, immediately understood everything. Immediately after that, he imagined in his head the images of high-ranking heroes. Immediately after that, several system notifications appeared, notifying that a group of mercenaries, the Wolves of Destruction, had arrived and a strong connection was felt between the five summoned. And advice was also given that with large summons, there is a small chance of heroes appearing who are connected to each other, and such heroes become stronger if they fight in one group. Then the protagonist looked at Izel, who appeared and asked if the master had invested money again, and she happily stated that he had bought a beginner's set for 50,000 won, while he understood that it was equal to 2.5 thousand crystals and 50,000 gold. Looking at the frightened pines standing next to him, Han thought that these were definitely high-ranking heroes, and in his place, he would have summoned them just to clear the fifth floor, and told her to return to the kitchen because nothing would be done to her. They were just a little special. Passing by Nate, the boy said that for now their group could relax, but in general, nothing would change from the appearance of newcomers. Then the narrative of the story moves closer to the inn building. Right next to it stood a beautiful black-haired girl. Seeing her, Jenna immediately ran closer and greeted her. Very surprised by this, the stranger greeted her back while she said her name and asked what her name was. A little confused, the black-haired girl said that her name was Eddies, and the archer imagined the handsome guy standing behind her as Han, and noted that he looked indifferent but was actually kind, while he asked her to be quiet. Looking at the new girl, the guy assessed her status window and thought that she even had a class, and you could immediately see a hero with 3 stars. A typical thief. Little strength and health, but high dexterity, and she preferred daggers to a bow. Looking at her menacingly, the protagonist asked her name again and asked if they could talk. Then the guys go inside the tavern, and Jenna brought them water, while Eddie's asked if he really knew anything about this place. While he answered that he knew something, this is something he does not, and asked her about it. Then Han asked if she remembered how she ended up here, and the black-haired girl, looking down sadly, answered that she didn't really, but she knew something. Sitting at the table, she stated that she was called there to fight, and her head hurt when she tried to remember some details, and the boy was interested in what she knew about synthesis. Hearing about synthesis, Eddies, with fear on her face, explained that it was strengthening by absorbing others. After her words, the protagonist thought that different ranks have different amounts of information, and noted that, judging by her equipment, she used to be a mercenary. Supporting her head with her hand, the black-haired girl stated that she was part of the Wolves of Destruction group, and the archer standing next to her noted that it sounded very cool, while she added that she remembered that she was just at work in Halcyon and woke up here. Having imagined the cards of different characters in his head, Han reasoned that she not only had 3 stars, but also the corresponding skills, and they were also mercenaries. But the difference with Carl was simply colossal. After listening to the new girl, Jenna noted that her story sounded very interesting, and she cautiously asked if she really thought so. At that moment, Eddies looked away, declaring that now everything was different. Immediately after that, they heard the fairy's voice calling Diego, Jacon, Kevin, Derek, and Eddies, and asking them to go out, because the master would call, and the protagonist, pointing to the window, noted that it seemed like it was time for them to go to the square. At that moment, a muscular man would come out of his room with a disgruntled look and ask who had called him. Getting up from her place, the black-haired girl would say that the master really needed them and it was time to go. Biting into a piece of meat, Jackin would say that he hadn't eaten it for a long time, and he should have known what kind of master he was. After that, he would slam the door behind him and go outside, while Chloe would run into the hall, and with a frightened look she would say that he had said that he wanted meat and then he had collected a whole mountain, and they could feed 5 people with it. Enraged by what she had heard, the archer would say that they had to make him give it back, and Han, getting up from his place, would say that they needed to go to the square. At this time, the newcomers gathered together and agreed to change the name of Group 5 to Wolves of Destruction, and the system notification window announced that the group was formed and moved the heroes to the free slots. After that, the system notification window announced that the heroes joined the Wolves of Destruction group, and among them were Diego, Eddies, Derek, Jackin, and Kevin, and the first was appointed as the leader of the Wolves of Destruction group, while they all stood next to each other. At this time in the square, a satisfied man declared that something was clearly wrong with him and they had a gun, and the boy explained that he also had one. At the same time, the man began to come up with some other excuse, and the protagonist asked that they really left a feeling of bad people, and then immediately agreed. Watching as Izel told the newbies to go inside, because the master was waiting for her, the father happily agreed, thinking that the reason for their fear was understandable, and they didn't look like kind people, and they were strong. Suddenly looking at Jenna standing behind him, Han asked what she thought. She answered that Eddie's seemed normal, but it was hard to say about the others. When the boy turned to the others and asked what they wanted from him then, and was it really protection? And they confirmed it. With a smirk on his face, he asked if it was really for nothing, and the frightened man said that he was strong. That's why they were asking him. Looking in their direction with an arrogant look, the protagonist asked that they themselves constantly missed training, and now they wanted his help and were only capable of begging from those who were stronger than them. While everyone else was very dumbfounded by such a statement, he thought that none of them even came close to Tom's strength, and just pretended in front of the master. And then rally meet that Jenna brought, and they had a lot of time to learn some craft and start being useful, but the only thing they thought about was avoiding synthesis. Looking menacingly at them, Han told them to get out of there before he got angry. Hearing such a statement, the man was very scared. Immediately after that, he left the square with the rest of the people. Looking at Nate standing next to him, Han explained that while he was bleeding out surrounded by goblins, they just ate, slept in comfort, and there was no need to feel sorry for them. And then a sad look went down. Looking at the wounded Tom, the boy asked if he had really been fighting, and the latter, not understanding how he knew, while he was explaining that it was written all over his face. Immediately after that, the confused spearman explained that it was a simple duel and he himself asked, and the protagonist, after a short pause, said that they could rest. Then he looked at Jenna, who was standing next to him, humming a song, and asked what she was hanging around there for. After some time, the system notification window promised that the floor was cleared and a group of mercenaries were leaving the portal, saying that there were complete weaklings inside, and they couldn't believe that there were only goblins and no fun there. Suddenly, Diego looked menacingly straight ahead, asking who the hell he was. Hearing this, Han only smirked. After which, moving his hand to the side, he asked why it mattered to him at all. Angry at this answer, Jaqen didn't understand who he thought he was, and Jenna, who was standing right in front of them, noted that they hadn't spoken up themselves. And Kevin didn't understand who she was then. At that moment, Diego decided to give his name, explaining that he was the captain of the mercenary group, the Wolves of Destruction, and said that it was his turn now. And the boy, sitting next to him with a smile on his face, said that his name was Han. Seeing that he had a weapon, Diego assumed that he was a mercenary, and the protagonist, sitting in his place, explained that he was a simple farmer. Looking straight at him with distrust, the leader of the mercenary group could not believe his words. Omitting this fact, Diego, holding the hilt of his sword, asked that all the locals gather in the square when the conscription begins, and Han explained that this is true and asked why he needed this information. Looking at him menacingly, the leader of the mercenary group understood everything. Immediately after this, the system notification window notified that the master was summoning 10 heroes, and they were going to find out who it would be. And the boy who saw this was surprised that he would make 10 simple summons. The protagonist was very interested in what he was planning, while the gates were opening at this time, and the system notification window notified that the master had started synthesis, and it was necessary to transfer the heroes to free slots for use in synthesis, but then they would all be lost. After some time, people came out of the portal who did not understand what kind of place this was, where they were, and what was happening at all. And the fairy, stunned by this, declared that the master had again summoned a bunch of mediocrities. Immediately after this, Izel named several of them and told them to go into the synthesis room, while the people, frightened by this fact, did not understand who she was, how she knew their names, while she explained that the master said to go there and they should shut up and do it. Suddenly, Jaqen came up to Dimon and grabbed him by the neck, assuming that it was him, and he immediately began to rise in price. Watching everything that was happening, Jenna said that this could not be, and her ally noted that anything was possible, while she said that they had just arrived. At the same time, Diego told his subordinate not to forget about the second one, and he, with his mouth wide open, asked who was next. Having found the last person, he dragged these two to the synthesis gate, while Han, who was watching all this, did not understand that all the heroes from the real money summoning would be like this. At this moment, looking at the boy standing next to him, the archer declared that this was wrong, and they were not even given a chance, and he silently reasoned that Ennet was making a huge mistake. He also noticed that although there was a lot of trash among the one-stars, there were also diamonds. But he didn't even try to check them, while the muscular man, shrouded in a bright golden glow, declared that he had definitely become stronger. The system notification window notified that he had increased his level. Immediately after that, the Fen called the names of several more people. They screamed in fear of what would happen to them and begged for having exposed his weapon. The leader of the mercenaries ordered his subordinates not to let him run away, and they immediately grabbed their blades, obeying the order. Looking at Eddie standing behind him, Diego asked why she was standing like a pillar. Was she part of the group or not? And she only silently lowered her gaze downwards, after which the black-haired girl closed her eyes, realizing the hopelessness of the situation. A moment later, the thief took her knife out of its sheath. Suddenly, the protagonist told Izel to send the master a piece of advice that it would be better not to merge the heroes without any verification, and she immediately opened the keyboard, started typing messages, and put forward an advice that he could lose valuable heroes if he did not even try to verify them and immediately synthesize them. Han closed his eyes and thought that he had to go through so many situations after coming here, and it was like a completely new life. Jaqen, angry at his words, came closer and said that it would be better if he did not interfere with them, and the smiling boy noted that he did not interfere with them at all, but simply gave the master an advice. Smugly looking at the muscular man standing next to him, he asked that it was really not so funny anymore. Hearing this, the warrior got angry, took out his axe and swung it, calling him a damn bastard. At that moment, an arrow flew right next to his head. Aiming straight at him, Joanna would say that the next one would be for the head, and Jaqen would grit his teeth in frustration and call them scum. Holding his sword straight in front of him, Diego would ask if they had just attacked them, and Eddie's would ask him to wait and just talk, while he would wave her off and ask him to shut up. Pointing his blade straight at Han, the mercenary leader would ask if he even knew who they were, and Han would explain that of course he did. Then, looking down at him with a cocky expression, the boy would answer that they were just trash. Then the notification window of the system notified that he had shown hostility to as many as 4 heroes from the mercenary group Wolves of Destruction, and that a feud had broken out between them, so it was necessary to pay attention to the relationship between the heroes, while all the guys were looking menacingly straight at their offender. The fairy intervened, putting her hand in front of her and stopping them, declaring that the heroes were not allowed to fight among themselves, or they wanted the master to punish them. Looking at her, Han noted that there was no such rule, and the frightened fairy agreed with this and could not come up with an excuse. With a look full of seriousness, the boy offered to speak frankly and called them mercenaries. Menacingly looking at him, Diego asked what kind of nonsense this was, and explained that the most ordinary mercenaries who do work for a reward. Hearing this, the protagonist grinned maliciously and asked to stop fooling around, because in front of him was an ordinary gang of bandits. Looking at him smugly, the mercenary leader declared that he had treated him with patience, and that was how he had answered him, and asked if he really wanted to die. Immediately after that, Han turned to Izel, who was floating in the air, looking at her, and said that such heroes would only hinder them, and rank is rank, but character is not determined by stars. He also added that they would constantly cause chaos in settlement and reduce overall efficiency, which means they are ballast that needs to be gotten rid of, and the fairy looked at him dumbfounded and could do nothing to counter this. Then the boy, putting his hand in front of him with a sly grin on his face, said to start with a duel. Immediately after that, a notification window appeared, the system notifying that John had challenged Diego to a duel, and advice was given that duels are a way to resolve conflicts between heroes, and additional conditions can be added. Looking at his opponent, the leader of the mercenary group asked him if he had really gone crazy and what they had done to him. Watching him with an arrogant look, the boy noted that he could think of him as a mad dog that attacks everyone. Remembering the events of the recent past, he stated that he knew people like them well and asked if all the residents were in the square to understand if there could be someone strong in the settlement. And when they realized that there were no strong ones, they completely lost their fear. Moving his hand to the side with his eyes closed, the protagonist said that the newcomers who had just been called up would not be enough for them, right? And Diego asked what he meant by a volunteer. Standing behind Han, Jenna did not understand what kind of nonsense he was talking, and the boy stated that everything was simple. If he wins, he absorbs him. If the other wins, he absorbs the loser. After his words, the leader of the mercenary group grinned maliciously. At the same time, the system notification window announced that Diego agreed to a duel, and both heroes accepted the special conditions of synthesis and was interested in whether to start the battle, and he himself imagined a blade right in front of him, and with an arrogant look noted that it was entertaining. Han decided to start a duel, reached out his hand to the button, which indicated that both participants must agree to the conditions of the duel. Diego was clearly pleased with what was happening and readily took out his sword. However, the hero, before accepting the challenge, asked the enemy if he was scared. The protagonist felt responsible for those around him, so he asked Jenna to take the people to a safe zone. She looked at him with surprise and asked if he could handle it alone. The guy, wasting no time, began warming up before the fight. He turned to his partner and realized that the girl doubted him and his strength, and asked if she was really worried about him. At that moment, the button on the plate was pressed, and the challenge was officially accepted. The opponents looked at each other, agreed that the duel would end only when one of them admitted defeat. Diego understood that for his purposes he needed a living hero, not a dead one. The protagonist looked at Isil and asked her not to allow interference from the outside. The opponent, without waiting, began the attack and got angry that the guy did not even have time to draw his sword. The hero realized that his opponent had considerable potential. His strength was approaching 20, and his level of fencing reached the third level. Suddenly, the protagonist fell into a berserker state. His eyes lit up with a bright red light. Diego, despite his self-confidence, clearly underestimated his opponent, whose level was much higher. The guy skillfully dodged the attack and appeared behind Diego, grabbed him by the arm, and then sharply by the head, knocking him down. Diego fell face down, having received multiple wounds from sharp stones. The hero, wasting no time, took out his sword and began to deftly spin it with one hand, demonstrating superiority. He sharply thrust the weapon into the enemy's body and ordered him not to move. Diego screamed in pain and barely restrained himself. Han leaned over to him and demanded that he loudly declare his defeat. The opponent agreed, but his screams were so loud that the words were lost in them. The protagonist, not satisfied with this, thrust the sword even deeper and demanded that Diego repeat his words more clearly and loudly. At this moment, Kevin watched the fight and then intervened, begging Han to stop torturing his comrade. The guy turned to him and coldly replied that Diego's company would stop at nothing to devour them, and that their actions were far from harmless. The interlocutor heard this and was confused, as he believed that both sides were pursuing similar goals. Han continued to insist on his own, demonstrating that he did not intend to give in to this fight. The hero glanced at him sideways and coldly replied that if he said so, then it was indeed the truth. His words sounded with such confidence that there was no doubt in them. Diego lowered his head and looked at the floor. His tears were streaming down his face, and he, in a trembling voice, asked his opponent what he did not like, because they both agreed to this duel, and the decision to end it should be up to them. The man did not have time to say the words about his defeat. Diego was abruptly interrupted by the protagonist, who covered his mouth with his hand and said that since the enemy was silent, the fight continues. The hero turned to Kevin and declared that Diego was now his prey, and only he would decide what fate awaited him in the future. With these words, he pressed Diego's head to himself, holding him tightly in a grip. Derek and Eddie's watched their comrades' torment and could not hide their emotions. Diego's partner threatened the hero that this would not go unpunished and reminded him of who they were, and also that Han would regret his actions. However, the protagonist did not pay attention to the threats and continued to hold Diego, not giving him a chance to speak. Then he turned to Eddie's and asked if it was true that they were mercenaries. The girl was unable to look him in the eyes, so she quietly confirmed that they really did this in the past. The hero heard her answer and smiled. He interrupted her and declared that they were nothing more than a gang of robbers who rob even their own employers. After that, he asked her a direct question. Why does she continue to stay with them? Eddie's was confused and at a loss, replied that she was doing this only at her father's request, and asked Thee to think carefully before jumping to conclusions. Han did not let Diego go, looked at her carefully and asked if she wanted to stay in this group or was ready to go over to his side. The girl found herself in a difficult situation, not knowing what to do. Her partner from the group was furious at such a proposal and shouted that she had no right to betray them and go over to the enemy. Meanwhile, Diego, taking advantage of the moment, carefully reached for his sword, hoping to free himself. In the background, threats continued from her partner, who warned Eddie's about the consequences of betrayal. As soon as Diego's hand almost touched the weapon, the hero instantly reacted and pinned his palm to the ground with his sword. Han did not take his eyes off the girl and calmly stated that there was room for one person in his team. The girl's partner shouted in rage that she would pay for her betrayal. Eddie's trembled with fear and then closed her eyes, trying to focus on making a decision. She made a choice and left the group known as the Wolves of Destruction, and slowly walked towards the protagonist. Han was satisfied and understood that the right choice could change everything. His gaze expressed satisfaction because he knew that this step was a turning point in their confrontation. The girl's former partners saw her switch to the hero's side and were furious. Their looks were filled with anger and disappointment, but Eddie's did not care at all about their emotions. She asked them to disappear and demonstrated complete indifference to their threats and reproaches. At this moment, the hero did not loosen his grip and pressed Diego to the ground even harder, not giving him the slightest chance to resist. Diego was choking and trying to utter words about his defeat, but Han doubted his sincerity and asked if he was really ready to give up, as he suspected that this could only be a trick to avoid a final defeat. In response, Diego hissed that the hero would regret his actions, after which he screamed loudly, calling his partners for help. His scream became a signal for the girl's former allies, who rushed to attack the main character. Izel instantly appeared in their path, stopping them with her piercing gaze. She reminded them that the duel was not over yet, and they had no right to interfere in a fair fight. But her words did not have the desired effect. The opponents, blinded by rage, ordered her to get out of the way and not interfere. Ignoring her warnings, they continued moving towards the hero, ready to tear him apart. The protagonist noticed them approaching, only chuckled and mentally said goodbye to them, knowing that Izel would not tolerate such a violation of the rules. The fairy, her eyes lit up with a mad gleam, cast a glance at the attackers, and said that she warned them in advance. The next moment, the air was filled with cries of pain, and the bodies of the opponents flew in different directions. Izel, with an unperturbed expression on her face, stretched out her hand, and splashes of her enemy's blood flew around her. She once again reminded them that she warned them, but they did not listen. Now their fate was sealed. They returned to the arms of the Lord. Diego watched this and was horrified. His body trembled and his eyes widened in fear when he realized that he was trapped between two powerful opponents. Izel, as if nothing had happened, flew up to the hero and asked if she did the right thing. Han, not hiding his satisfaction, praised her and noted that she acted flawlessly. At that moment, Diego, completely broken, quietly whispered that he surrendered. The hero heard his words, noticed how the sign hanging in the air changed its state, signaling the end of the berserker mode. His hair fluttered softly in the wind. Han, feeling a slight headache, realized that using such a mode was not worth the extra effort, and decided to be more careful with its activation in the future. The protagonist leaned toward Diego, with a slight grin noted that if his opponent had a better understanding of the system and realized how everything could end, he would never have agreed to this duel. Izel continued to hover above them and warned that the master had already pressed the screen many times, clearly irritated by what was happening. At that moment, a card with his image appeared in front of the hero's eyes, which indicated that his skills had increased in level. Han, although not surprised by this, noticed that Izel, on the contrary, was in a panic. She assumed that the master, disappointed with the course of events, might quit the game, especially considering that he had only used the hero once, for whom he had paid a considerable sum. However, the boy reassured her, and noted that if the player was weak-willed, he would have quit the game long ago after synthesizing the 4-star heroine. The protagonist slowly rose to his feet, unable to hide his slight disappointment. He remembered how many summons had been wasted, only to have everything go to synthesizing. However, on the other hand, he understood that these heroes were just ballast for him, and their disappearance was not a great loss. His gaze slid over the lifeless bodies, and he thought that the master might understand his mistakes in the future, but now he was clearly beside himself with rage. Han, who had already reached level 10, realized that his stats were close to a 3-star hero, which made him a valuable participant in most battles. He understood that if the master did not decide to synthesize him, he would never be able to climb to the top of the tower. The hero raised his eyes to the sky and noticed how the player's eye was visible in the sky, watching him. Han wondered what was going on in the master's head, what thoughts and emotions were possessing him at that moment. The protagonist looked at this eye, silently said to himself that he should not even think about getting rid of it. His voice, full of determination and confidence, sounded like a warning address to the owner of his destinies.